A scenic overlook establishes the setting at Frontier City, Yugenotsu. Inside a barbershop, dark locks of hair flutter to the wooden floor as the barber questions why his customer would cut such beautiful hair. The middle-aged barber stands with his scissors and comb, asking his guest about the circumstances behind the sudden change of appearance. Sitting in the chair, a young man with black hair prepares to share his story, murmuring hesitantly. A vibrant visual reveals the young man alongside a dark-haired woman and a blonde woman, hinting at his destiny. In a flashback, the dark-haired woman, Alphine, angrily criticizes the young man, Finn, for his poor sword-swinging form. Narration introduces Alphine as one of the world's 3 legendary swordmasters and Finn's childhood friend and girlfriend. Finn defends himself against her overly demanding and condescending teaching methods, but she arrogantly commands absolute obedience. Smiling with quiet tolerance, Finn acknowledges his role as her supportive lover and partner despite her growing hubris. Alphine bursts into mocking laughter, treating his serious feelings as a ridiculous joke. Finn secretly reflects on her real, selfish personality, which has grown far from her public image as a flawless sword goddess. As her heavy boots walk away, Finn remembers how different she used to be when they were children. Recalling her rise to nobility, Finn remembers how her mounting stress transformed her into a toxic, abusive partner who vents her anger on him. Reaching his breaking point, Finn points a finger at Alphine and boldly declares that he is ending their relationship. Shocked by his sudden rebellion, Alphine looks on in stunned, wide-eyed disbelief. Finn resolves to reclaim his independence, determined to find treasure and defeat monsters as an independent adventurer. Smiling with newfound courage, Finn feels his worn-down self-esteem return as he finally speaks his mind. Alphine sweats nervously, struggling to comprehend that her once-compliant boyfriend is actually serious. She screams in outrage, demanding to know why he would want to leave her side. Trembling with anxiety, Alphine bites her nails and desperately tries to convince him that he cannot survive on his own. Finn stands firm, stating he will not apologize and has left all her expensive gifts back at the mansion. He looks her in the eye and confirms his absolute decision to start a new life on the distant frontier. Finn hands back the commemorative sword they exchanged when they first became adventurers, leaving Alphine utterly heartbroken.
As Finn walks away into the forest, Alphine falls to her knees, crying out and begging him not to leave.
Back in the present, the barber sympathetic to Finn's harsh relationship continues working on his hair. Looking in the mirror, the young man marvels at his new short red hair, completely altering his appearance. The barber offers him specialized contact lenses made from demon materials to safely disguise his eye color. Staring closely at his reflection, the young man can barely recognize the red-haired person looking back at him. The barber asks him for his name as he prepares to finalize his new identity. Catching himself before saying Finn, the young man proudly introduces himself by his new name, Flint. The barber introduces himself as Lauren and warm-heartedly shakes hands with Flint. Newly disguised, Flint sets off into the busy streets of Frontier City, ready to start anew. Flint looks around the unfamiliar streets, searching for the local Adventurers Guild. Passing townspeople whisper and blush as they look at him, making Flint self-conscious about his flashy red hair. He finally spots the grand, impressive building of the Adventurers Guild. Inside, a cheerful receptionist named Rebecca warmly welcomes him and asks how she can assist. Rebecca quickly prepares the necessary paperwork, ready to explain the registration process to him. She points to a document explaining the guild's ranking system, which spans 5 stages from iron to platinum. She describes the 3 specialized fields of adventurers: excavators, searchers, and hunters. Rebecca uses a magical device to verify his hand for any criminal record and finds him completely cleared. Rebecca joyfully completes the registration, welcoming him as an official guild member. She hands over his official guild insignia, advising him to wear it proudly. Rebecca brings out a dark crystal ball, offering a free magic power measurement as a registration bonus. She explains that the crystal will change color based on his latent magic power, which surprises Flint since Alphine always banned magic as heresy. As Flint places his hand near the crystal, it suddenly shatters into countless pieces with a loud crack. Flint looks on in pure shock, completely bewildered by the broken shards. A sudden crash echoes as the crystal falls apart, leaving Flint wondering if he needs to pay for the damage. Rebecca assures him it was just a defect and provides a second crystal, which immediately shatters upon his touch. Stunned bystanders watch in disbelief as Rebecca realizes his magic power matches that of the legendary Infinite Mage. Flint nervously laughs it off, claiming both crystals must have been defective, and happily prepares to start his new life. Rebecca frantically asks the registering adventurer to wait so she can call the guildmaster, but Flint asks her not to draw attention to him. Footsteps echo on the floor as the surrounding crowd gasps in awe at the sudden arrival of a prominent figure. Rebecca gasps in pure shock as she recognizes the newly arrived noble mage, Lady Noelia. Flint silently observes her platinum rank emblem, surprised to realize this legendary mage is around his age. Having observed him since his arrival, Noelia notes his immense magic power and proposes doing a magic power synchronization with him instead of a formal guild inspection. When Flint admits he has no idea what magic synchronization is, Noelia stares back in utter disbelief, leaving him sweating with embarrassment. Noelia patiently explains that magic synchronization involves clasping hands to evaluate latent magic reserves while mutually enhancing their power. Assured by Noelia that the process is completely safe and standard practice, Flint readily agrees to give it a try. The surrounding crowd breaks into frantic whispers, warning that synchronizing magic with someone as powerful as Noelia could be fatal for an ordinary person. Rebecca screams in a panic, warning Noelia that her father strictly prohibited her from performing magic synchronization at will. Ignoring the receptionist's desperate pleas, Noelia gently presses her hands against Flint's palms to begin the process. Flint feels magic flowing through his palms, realizing the bystanders' terrifying warnings of danger were completely exaggerated. Noelia begins to pant and blush intensely as Flint's massive, inexhaustible magic power completely overwhelms her capacity. As Noelia rides from the overwhelming magic flow, the stunned onlookers realize this mysterious adventurer possesses monster-class power. Watching Noelia tearfully pant in pain, Flint grows incredibly flustered and frantically wonders how to break off the connection. Rebecca rushes over frantically to separate them, while a heavily flushed Noelia weakly insists she can still handle more. Flint pulls away in shock as Noelia collapses unconscious into Rebecca's waiting arms. Rebecca sweats in terror, realizing the extreme political danger if the ruling count learns his noble daughter collapsed. Flint is dumbfounded to see the entire tavern is cleared out, leaving him alone with the unconscious noble girl. Flint grips his hat in sheer panic, desperately hoping he won't be executed for what was clearly an accident. A terrifying roar sounds as the giant beast breathes fire, prompting Alphine to harshly scold Finn's sluggish movements during their past battle. The flashback highlights the terrifying power of the demonic dragon, a legendary beast known for slaughtering countless adventurers. During the battle, Alphine arrogantly threatens to double Finn's training the next time he makes a mistake. Chaos erupts as the dragon swings its massive tail, forcing Finn to scream a desperate warning to Alphine. Seeing Alphine in danger, Finn bravely charges forward to distract the colossal monster. With a desperate battle cry sounding, Finn lunges directly toward the giant dragon to shield his partner. Finn successfully lands a strike on the dragon's snout, drawing its aggressive focus entirely onto himself. Finn groans as he barely blocks the dragon's heavy claw, struggling under the beast's immense physical pressure. Taking a deep breath, Alphine composes herself to prepare a decisive blow against the distracted dragon. Finn desperately begs for backup, but Alphine patronizingly orders him to pull himself together instead of helping. Finn's weapon shatters under the pressure, leaving him completely defenseless as Alphine screams his name. Gritting his teeth despite his ruined sword, Finn prepares to face the beast barehanded. Alphine selfishly demands Finn continue blocking the beast so she can take the credit for the kill. Alphine finally leaps over Finn's shoulder, preparing to deliver the final strike. With a bright burst of magical energy, the Swordmaster unleashes her ultimate technique. Smirking confidently, Alphine declares that she will finish the dragon once and for all. Finn warns her that attacking alone is reckless, but Alphine arrogantly dismisses his concern as a Swordmaster. Alphine plunges her blade deep into the skull of the massive dragon. Alphine stands triumphantly on her sword embedded in the dragon's nose as it lets out a final roar. Finn watches in absolute awe as Alphine gracefully sticks her landing after defeating the monster. The gargantuan dragon crashes to the ground, defeated by the final devastating blow. Alphine wipes the sweat from her forehead, letting out a sigh of relief after the battle. While Alphine examines the dragon's tough hide, Finn notes that his sword is completely chipped and ruined. Alphine collapses exhaustedly against a tree, lazily ordering Finn to handle the heavy task of skinning the dragon alone. A sudden, sharp clap sounds as they share a high five to celebrate their joint victory. Back in the present, Alphine rolls around her bed in a fit of rage, seething over Finn's sudden independence. She bitterly recalls their dragon-slaying days, firmly believing they were bound by genuine trust and affection. She stares at the pile of high-grade equipment and money Finn abandoned to cut ties with her completely. Alphine is heartbroken to see Eve return their first commemorative adventurer sword and every gift she ever bought him. Kicking her bed in frustration, Alphine bites her nails, utterly unable to comprehend what she did wrong. Startled in her nightgown, Alphine gasps as her butler Vigo enters to ask if anything is wrong. Quickly turning away, Alphine claims she was just changing into loungewear while Vigo politely excuses himself. Clutching her nightgown, Alphine catches herself thinking of Finn again and how he always managed things perfectly. Sitting on her bed, Alphine asks Vigo if he requested the Adventurers Guild to search for Finn. Vigo reports that despite requesting multiple searches through the guild, Finn remains completely missing and seemingly hidden. Hearing that Finn left no clues about his destination before departing, Alphine grows increasingly anxious about his whereabouts. Terrified of people thinking she was abandoned, Alphine quickly hides her worry when Vigo asks if something is wrong. Gripping her bedsheets with frustration, Alphine realizes she will never find him if she continues like this. Alphine orders Vigo to expand the search to neighboring towns while keeping Finn's escape strictly confidential. Vigo promises to keep the search secret and departs, as Alphine demands Finn be found regardless of the cost. Lying on her bed, Alphine sighs in exhaustion, frustrated that she still cannot locate him. She reflects that while she could find him herself, her noble and knightly duties restrict her freedom. Biting her nails, she desperately wishes for Finn's obedience, willing to kneel herself just to have him back. Rebecca jumps back in surprise as a sudden loud sneeze echoes through the guild reception area. Rubbing his nose, Flint assures a worried Rebecca that he does not have a cold but felt an odd chill. Flint asks to claim his quest reward but suddenly freezes as an unsettling sensation washes over him. Flint senses a tingling feeling of being watched, prompting Rebecca to ask if something is wrong. Rebecca hands Flint a pouch containing his quest reward, praising his efficient choices like an experienced adventurer. Flint sweats nervously and laughs, completely caught off guard by the receptionist's sharp observation. Flint inwardly panics, recalling he discarded his platinum emblem to avoid being tracked by Alphine and must be careful. Flint lies that he received advice from a senior adventurer, which Rebecca finds to be an incredibly efficient strategy. Flint suddenly changes the subject, turning his gaze toward the back of the room. Pointing toward a pillar, Flint pleads with Rebecca to do something about the noble mage peeking at them. Flint complains that ever since Noelia collapsed during their magic synchronization, she has been constantly watching him. Flint panics with embarrassment, explaining how Noelia even followed him to his inn and stayed in the room next door. Rebecca cheerfully declares it impossible to stop her, explaining that Noelia has never lost a magic synchronization battle before. Rebecca reveals that the Frontier Count ordered the guild to ignore Noelia's actions, leaving them powerless to intervene. Watching Noelia appear from a distance, Flint decides to ignore her since she is only observing him. Leaning over the counter, Flint desperately whispers to Rebecca, begging her to speak with Noelia for him. Peeking from behind a wooden pillar, Noelia focuses intently, frustrated that she cannot hear their whispered conversation. Rebecca happily rejects his request for a third time, completely ignoring his desperate pleas for assistance. Rebecca explains that Noelia will keep monitoring Flint until she finally gets bored of his immense magic power. Flint sweats in dread, realizing this constant monitoring is just like the stressful tension he escaped from Alphine. In a vivid flashback, a monstrous dragon lets out a deafening roar as Alphine scolds Finn's slow reactions. The legendary demonic dragon stands tall, feared as a natural disaster that has slaughtered countless brave adventurers. Ignoring the immediate danger, Alphine arrogantly threatens to double Finn's training if he slips up again. Finn screams a desperate warning as the dragon's massive tail swings violently toward an off-guard Alphine. Realizing Alphine is in mortal danger, Finn charges forward to draw the beast's aggressive focus. With a fierce battle cry, Finn rushes past Alphine to shield her from the dragon's wrath. Finn delivers a direct strike to the dragon's snout, successfully drawing its lethal attention onto himself. Finn groans under the immense pressure as he barely deflects the dragon's massive crushing claw. Taking a deep breath, Alphine composes herself to prepare her final decisive magic attack. Finn desperately begs Alphine for assistance, but she selfishly commands him to hold the line. Finn's weapon shatters under the pressure, leaving him completely defenseless as Alphine screams his name. Gritting his teeth, Finn holds his broken hilt and prepares to face the beast barehanded. Alphine demands Finn continue blocking the beast so she can swoop in to take the kill. Alphine finally leaps over Finn's shoulder, preparing to deliver the final strike with her sword. With a brilliant flash of magical energy, Alphine lunges downward to execute her ultimate swordmaster technique. Smirking confidently, Alphine declares that she will finish off the colossal dragon once and for all. Finn warns her that attacking alone is reckless, but Alphine arrogantly dismisses his concern. Alphine stabs her blade deep into the dragon's skull, declaring her pride as a swordmaster. The colossal dragon lets out a final agonizing groan as Alphine poses triumphantly on her embedded blade. Finn watches in absolute awe as Alphine gracefully lands, the colossal beast finally collapsing. With a decisive final strike, Alphine fiercely declares that the colossal monster has been defeated. Alphine sighs in relief, wiping sweat from her forehead after finally defeating the legendary dragon. While Alphine examines the dragon's tough hide, Finn notes his sword is completely chipped and ruined. Alphine collapses exhaustedly against a tree, lazily ordering a bewildered Finn to skin the massive dragon alone. A sudden sharp clap sounds as they share a high five to celebrate their joint victory. Seething over Finn's sudden independence, Alphine rolls around her bed in a fit of rage. She bitterly recalls their dragon-slaying days, firmly believing they were bound by genuine trust and affection. She stares at the pile of high-grade equipment and money Finn abandoned to cut ties completely. Alphine is heartbroken to see he even returned their first commemorative sword and every gift she bought. Kicking her bed in frustration, Alphine bites her nails, utterly unable to comprehend what went wrong. Startled in her nightgown, Alphine gasps as her butler Vigo enters to ask if anything is wrong. Clutching her nightgown, Alphine catches herself thinking of Finn again and how he always managed things perfectly. Sitting on her bed, Alphine asks Vigo if he requested the Adventurers Guild to search for Finn. Vigo reports that despite requesting multiple searches through the guild, Finn remains completely missing and seemingly hidden. Hearing that Finn left no clues about his destination before departing, Alphine grows increasingly anxious. Terrified of people thinking she was abandoned, Alphine quickly hides her worry when Vigo questions her reaction. Ripping her bedsheets with frustration, Alphine realizes she will never find him if she continues like this. Alphine orders Vigo to expand the search to neighboring towns while keeping Finn's escape strictly confidential. Vigo promises to keep the search secret and departs as Alphine demands Finn be found regardless of cost. Lying on her bed, Alphine sighs in exhaustion, frustrated that she still cannot locate him. She reflects that while she could find him herself, her noble and knightly duties restrict her freedom. Biting her nails, she desperately wishes for Finn's obedience, willing to kneel herself just to have him back. Rebecca jumps back in surprise as a sudden loud sneeze echoes through the guild reception area. Rubbing his nose, Flint assures a worried Rebecca that he does not have a cold but felt an odd chill. Flint asks to claim his quest reward but suddenly freezes as an unsettling sensation washes over him. Flint senses a tingling feeling of being watched, prompting Rebecca to ask if something is wrong. Rebecca hands Flint a pouch containing his quest reward, praising his efficient choices like an experienced adventurer. Flint sweats nervously and laughs, completely caught off guard by the receptionist's sharp observation. Flint inwardly panics, recalling he discarded his platinum emblem to avoid being tracked by Alphine and must be careful. Flint lies that he received advice from a senior adventurer, which Rebecca finds to be an incredibly efficient strategy. Flint suddenly changes the subject, turning his gaze toward the back of the room. Pointing toward a pillar, Flint pleads with Rebecca to do something about the noble mage peeking at them. Flint complains that ever since Noelia collapsed during their magic synchronization, she has been constantly watching him. Flint panics with embarrassment, explaining how Noelia even followed him to his inn and stayed in the room next door. Rebecca cheerfully declares it impossible to stop her, explaining that Noelia has never lost a magic synchronization battle before. Rebecca reveals that the Frontier Count ordered the guild to ignore Noelia's actions, leaving them powerless to intervene. Watching Noelia appear from a distance, Flint decides to ignore her since she is only observing him. Leaning over the counter, Flint desperately whispers to Rebecca, begging her to speak with Noelia for him. Peeking from behind a wooden pillar, Noelia focuses intently, frustrated that she cannot hear their whispered conversation. Rebecca happily rejects his request for a third time, completely ignoring his desperate pleas for assistance. Rebecca explains that Noelia will keep monitoring Flint until she finally gets bored of his immense magic power. Flint sweats in dread, realizing this constant monitoring is just like the stressful tension he escaped from Alphine. Traveling to the outskirt forests of Young Hanotis, Flint prepares for his next quest with his sword drawn. Flint is suddenly surrounded by muddy golems that keep continuously rising from the ground. Deciding to wipe them out all at once, Flint bravely charges toward the monsters. Swinging his sword with determination, Flint unleashes a powerful slash to clear his path. With a decisive strike, Flint destroys the last remaining mud golem, successfully completing his battle. Flint sighs in relief, hoping he has finally defeated the last of the monsters. Counting 20 defeated golems on the ground, Flint realizes he might have gone completely overboard. Flint packs 5 golem heads for the subjugation proof, realizing submitting more would look suspicious. Flint packages the heads, determined to hide his past platinum rank so he can start over. Flint asks Noelia to keep a secret if she is watching, then prepares to depart. A sudden rustling sound echoes from the dense bushes nearby, breaking the quiet forest silence. Wearing a makeshift leaf camouflage, Noelia watches him from behind a tree, wondering what he's hiding. Receiving no response, Flint assumes Noelia has agreed to keep his secret as birds fly overhead. Flint notes that Noelia has been constantly following his footsteps ever since he left the guild. Flint recalls failing to shake Noelia off in town, prompting him to sprint into the forest. Flint suddenly stops as he notices that Noelia's persistent presence behind him has vanished. Flint stands in the forest, bewildered to find that Noelia is no longer following him. A violent rustling in the bushes catches Flint off guard, sparking instant alarm. Flint panics upon finding Noelia's cloak covered in a mysterious slimy fluid on the ground. Pushing frantically through the dense foliage, Flint screams Noelia's name in desperate search. Flint rushes forward to rescue Noelia, who has been captured by a giant man-eating plant. Flint is horrified to see Noelia tightly bound and gagged by the plant monster's thick vines. Flint slashes at the vines, but grits his teeth as they immediately begin to regenerate. As more monsters emerge, Flint begs a tearful Noelia to hold on while he fights through. While attempting to sever the vines, Flint is struck back by a sudden enemy strike. Noelia crashes to the ground, coughing violently after finally being freed from the monster's grip. Flint instructs Noelia to cling to his back for escape, and she thanks him gratefully. Terrified of clinging to him, Noelia blushes intensely and proposes using her magic to escape. Flint trusts Noelia to handle the monsters as she readies her staff to cast powerful magic. A bright flame gathers around Noelia's staff as she chants an incantation to summon her magic. With a powerful battle cry, Noelia unleashes a massive fire lance to obliterate the plant monsters. The intense magical flames completely incinerate the man-eating plant monsters in an instant. Flint watches in absolute awe, deeply impressed by the incredible convenience and power of her magic. Flint blushes intensely upon noticing Noelia's torn, slime-covered clothes and quickly averts his gaze. Realizing her exposed state, Noelia panics with spiral eyes and blushes in complete embarrassment. Flint lends Noelia his cloak, which she gratefully accepts to cover her bare skin. Flint asks if she is hurt while Noelia casts a purification spell to clean herself. Flint is amazed to see her use water magic to flawlessly clean the acidic slime off. Relieved she is unhurt, Flint offers to escort Noelia back to the city in her state. Noelia politely declines his escort, and Flint notes she is a good person at heart. Flint points out that a high-rank mage like Noelia shouldn't have been caught so easily. Noelia admits she got caught because she was too busy observing him to check her surroundings. Noelia demands to know why Flint relies on swords instead of using his massive magic power. Flint confesses he does not know how to use magic, only knowing how to wield swords. Noelia admits she thought his excuses at the guild were just lies to hide his true power. Noelia finds it hard to believe that Flint has immense magic power without ever studying magic. Flint asks Noelia to explain how magic is activated, and she explains it requires chanting incantations. A simplified diagram illustrates how magic power flows through an incantation to generate a physical effect. Noelia explains that incantations are secondary aids used to easily visualize the desired magical effects. She details how a simple fire arrow spell is visualized, materialized, and fired at a target. Noelia decides to demonstrate the fire arrow magic in person so Flint can witness it directly. Noelia shoots a fire arrow at a tree, prompting an impressed "I see" from Flint. Flint asks if mimicking her chant and visualization would allow him to activate the spell too. Noelia encourages Flint, stating his immense magic power should make casting a fire arrow very easy. Noelia eagerly urges Flint to try casting, and he prepares to test it on a tree. Preparing to cast, Flint focuses on imagining the magic effect, visualizing gigantic flames flying like an arrow. Flint shouts "Fire Arrow" as he unleashes a shockingly massive torrent of magical flames. A shocked Noelia cries out in alarm, questioning what kind of massive spell Flint is actually invoking. Powerful blast knocks them back, prompting Flint to grab Noelia and tell her to hang on. Far away, the tremors knock over a teacup, leaving locals wondering if an earthquake has struck the forest. Peering out a window, Rebecca wonders if the sudden tremor is actually an earthquake. Flint laughs nervously, admitting his attempt was probably a bit too large for a simple fire arrow. While Flint hopes his magic shape was correct, Noelia despairs on the ground, insisting it was completely different. Having returned to his hunt, Flint stands in the outskirt forest with his sword drawn. Surrounded by regenerating mud golems, Flint realizes it will be a pain if he gets surrounded further. Deciding to take them all at once, Flint charges forward to shatter the golems. Swinging his sword with swift precision, Flint cuts through the continuous horde of mud golems. Flint delivers a decisive slash to defeat the very last of the mud golems. Flint catches his breath, sighing in relief that the exhausting battle is finally over. Counting 20 defeated mud golems, Flint realizes he has once again gone completely overboard. Flint tacks exactly 5 golem heads, knowing submitting any more would look highly suspicious. Desperate to hide his former platinum rank, Flint finishes packing so he can start over from scratch. Flint prepares to depart, asking Noelia to keep a secret if she is still watching. Hidden behind a tree and leaf camouflage, Noelia wonders if he is trying to hide his power. Receiving no response, Flint assumes she has agreed to keep a secret as he walks away. Flint notes that Noelia has been constantly following his footsteps since he left the guild. Recalling his failure to shake her off in town, Flint had dashed into the forest to escape. Flint suddenly stops, bewildered to find that Noelia's persistent presence behind him has vanished. A sudden loud rustling in the bushes catches Flint off guard, sparking instant alarm. Flint panics upon finding Noelia's cloak covered in a mysterious slimy fluid on the ground. Pushing frantically through the dense foliage, Flint screams Noelia's name in desperate search. Flint rushes forward to rescue Noelia, who has been captured by giant man-eating plant monsters. Flint is horrified to see Noelia tightly bound and gagged by the plant monster's thick vines. Flint slashes at the vines but grits his teeth as they immediately begin to regenerate. As more monsters emerge, Flint begs a tearful Noelia to hold on while he fights through. While attempting to sever the vines, Flint is struck back by a sudden enemy strike. Noelia crashes to the ground, coughing violently after finally being freed from the monster's grip. Flint instructs Noelia to cling to his back for escape, and she thanks him gratefully. Terrified of clinging to him, Noelia blushes intensely and proposes using her magic to escape instead. Flint trusts Noelia to handle the monsters as she readies her stat to cast. Bright flame gathers around Noelia's staff as she chants her incantation. With a powerful cry, Noelia unleashes a massive fire lance to obliterate the monsters. Intense magical flames completely incinerate the man-eating plant monsters in an instant. Flint watches in absolute awe, deeply impressed by the incredible convenience of her magic. Flint blushes intensely upon noticing Noelia's torn, slime-covered clothes and quickly averts his gaze. Realizing her exposed state, Noelia panics with spiral eyes and blushes in complete embarrassment. Flint lends Noelia his cloak, which she gratefully accepts to cover her bare skin. Flint asks if she is hurt while Noelia casts a purification spell to clean herself. Flint is amazed to see her use water magic to flawlessly clean the acidic slime off. Relieved she is unhurt, Flint offers to escort Noelia back to the city in her state. Noelia politely declines his escort, and Flint notes she is a good person at heart. Flint points out that a high-rank mage like Noelia shouldn't have been caught so easily. Noelia admits she got caught because she was too busy observing him to check her surroundings. Noelia demands to know why Flint relies on swords instead of using his massive magic power. Flint confesses he does not know how to use magic, only knowing how to wield swords. Flint reflects on how his previous remarks at the guild must have seemed like a lie to Noelia. Noelia struggles to believe Flint possesses such incredible magical power without ever studying magic. Flint asks Noelia to explain how magic works, and she explains it requires chanting an incantation. A diagram demonstrates how magic power flows through an incantation to generate a physical effect. Noelia clarifies that incantations are secondary aids used to easily visualize magical effects. The visual explains how a rudimentary fire arrow spell is visualized and fired. Noelia demonstrates the spell, casting a fire arrow at a tree while Flint watches, deeply impressed. Noelia explains that memorizing chants is standard practice, prompting Flint to ask if mimicking her will work. Noelia confidently assures Flint that his immense magic power should make casting a fire arrow very easy. Noelia eagerly urges Flint to try casting, and he prepares to test it on a tree. Preparing to cast, Flint focuses on imagining gigantic flames flying like an arrow. Shouting the incantation, Flint unleashes a massive blinding surge of magical flames from his hand. Noelia panics in sheer horror as she realizes Flint is invoking an overwhelmingly destructive spell. A massive explosion erupts, engulfing the forest in a colossal blast of fire and smoke. Flint grabs Noelia protectively to shelter her as they are both blown back by the blast. A powerful tremor rumbles across the land, shaking the entire city. Inside a mansion, a teacup falls over as startled residents wonder if an earthquake hit. Peering out of her window, Rebecca is surprised by the sudden tremor and wonders if it is an earthquake. Flint laughs nervously, sheepishly admitting his fire arrow attempt was probably a bit too large. While Flint hopes his magic's shape was correct, Noelia despairs on the ground, insisting it was completely different. Back at the Adventurers Guild, Flint recalls his intensive magic practice session with Noelia from the previous day. Handing in his documents, Flint explains to Rebecca that he is struggling to adjust his magic. Rebecca suddenly grabs her desk in complete surprise, urgently calling out to Flint. Rebecca leans in close and whispers about mysterious explosion reports that reached the guild yesterday. Flint sweats nervously, completely bewildered by the sudden mention of mysterious explosion sounds. Flint guiltily realizes that the smoking, devastated forest from yesterday was entirely his fault. Noelia had deduced that Flint's magic was far too powerful to be a simple fire arrow, comparing it to an advanced explosion. Flint had explained that he simply visualized the spell based on her incantation. Noelia had angrily yelled that he was entirely wrong, surprising Flint with her sudden outburst. Flint had sweated nervously over his misadjusted power, while Noelia stood completely despondent behind him. Determined to help him, Noelia had prepared her staff to extinguish any potential fires. Flint had repeatedly failed, creating spells that were either too small or far too massive. Back in the present, Flint asks if practicing magic is forbidden, and Rebecca quickly reassures him. Rebecca explains that large-scale magic requires prior guild authorization, leaving Flint shocked by the strict rules. Noelia suddenly enters the guild, confidently offering to personally compensate for any damages Flint causes. Noelia holds a wrapped package, presenting it along with an official letter from her father. Rebecca accepts her offer, leaving a surprised Flint to thank Noelia for her generous consideration. Noelia presents a beautifully crafted sword, explaining it was a special weapon she swiped from her father's collection. Flint's sweat drops, realizing she casually admitted to stealing the sword, which is far too valuable a reward. Flint politely declines her gift, prompting a shocked Noelia to ask if he dislikes the weapon. Flint insists he cannot accept such an expensive weapon, patting his coin pouch with a bright smile. Noelia insists that her family's honor is at stake if she cannot repay him for saving her life. Flint gets an idea, proposing that she become his magic instructor instead of giving him a sword. Noelia blushes intensely, shyly admitting she is mostly trained with swords and might not be a perfect teacher. Flint notes her high status, recalling she is a platinum-grade adventurer and the daughter of a count. Noelia eagerly accepts his request and proposes they head to the outskirts to practice magic together. Noelia smiles warmly, and Flint is charmed, realizing she is just a normal, sweet girl at heart. Stepping onto a grassy field, Flint marvels at the massive crater left behind by his previous magic. Noelia clears her throat as she approaches Flint, interrupting his thoughts to begin their lesson. Readying her staff, Noelia explains that Flint's magic is unstable because he has the wrong perception of magic. Flint explains that because he has spent his entire life wielding a sword, magic is completely new and amazing to him. Pointing her finger, Noelia explains that normal people lack the power to activate magic, while Flint simply overestimates it because of his massive mana supply. Flint understands, while Noelia explains that when magic fails to activate, it means he is simply not imagining enough. Flint asks if his power will remain unstable until he corrects his perception of magic, and Noelia confirms she believes so. Picking up her staff, Noelia reassures Flint that there is a way to fix his unstable magic.
Noelia blushes while synchronizing their magic by holding Flint's hand, explaining that this time their consciousness will overlap before asking him to chant.
Flint closes his eyes and recites the incantation to summon a hot-burning arrow that will penetrate his enemy. Entering Flint's consciousness, Noelia observes his visualization and instructs him that the fire arrow size must be much smaller. Inside his mind, Flint tries to visualize the flame even smaller, wondering if his adjustment is correct.
Noelia holds his hand and tells him the flame is still too big, noting he imagines magic excessively.
Flint struggles to imagine an even smaller flame while Noelia promises to guide him to the right size. Once the flame reaches the ideal size, Flint returns to reality and unleashes a properly scaled fire arrow. A clean, normal-sized burst of fire successfully strikes the target tree. Overjoyed by the success, Flint suddenly pulls Noelia into a tight hug to celebrate their breakthrough. Blushing intensely with spiral eyes, Noelia flusteredly confirms that he successfully cast a well-controlled fire arrow. Shyly looking away, Noelia suggests she would not mind holding on to him for a little while longer. Realizing he's suddenly hugged a high-class noblewoman, Flint panics and leaps back in complete embarrassment. Flint frantically bows to apologize, while a blushing Noelia assures him she understands his excitement. Handing him her staff, Noelia explains that mages use wands to reduce mana consumption, prompting Flint's curiosity. Noelia demonstrates her skill by casting a powerful fire lance without a wand, leaving Flint highly impressed. A horde of aggressive giant ants emerges, provoked by the earlier blast of Flint's fire magic. Spotting around 50 to 60 giant ants approaching, Flint prepares to use them as spellcasting practice. Flint readies the staff, chanting the incantation to fire a single arrow of flames. The fire arrow strikes the lead giant ant, obliterating it in a clean explosion. Flint is amazed by the power of magic, which easily pierced the monster's hard shell. As the horde charges, Noelia warns him to focus instead of admiring his own spell. Remembering that magic relies on imagination, Flint wonders if he can visualize firing multiple fire arrows simultaneously. Flint chants a modified spell for a group of burning arrows, deeply shocking Noelia. Flint tells a bewildered Noelia to back him up if his experimental magic fails to work. Raising his wand, Flint unleashes a devastating fire arrow barrage across the entire field. Multiple explosive streaks of fire rain down, completely decimating the incoming horde of giant ants. Noelia stands in absolute shock at the incredible speed and destructive power of his spell. Noelia angrily scolds Flint for completely ignoring her instructions while he sheepishly asks if he failed. Blushing, Noelia admits she is actually amazed by his magnificent new spell, suggesting they report it. Flint decides that becoming a magic swordsman is the perfect way to hide from his past. Flint warmly thanks Noelia, declaring he will now call himself a magic swordsman. Flint kneels before Noelia, formally requesting that she continue acting as his magic instructor. Blushing with joy, Noelia happily accepts his request to assist him for years to come. Flint laughs, joking that her erst response sounds exactly like a marriage proposal. Noelia returns to her noble mansion, greeted warmly by a maid as she steps inside. Alone in her room, Noelia blushes happily while wrapping herself in Flint's borrowed cloak. A flustered chibi version of Noelia comically demands help with her scanlation project. At the guild, Flint reviews quest documents while reflecting on his magic practice yesterday. Handing over his paperwork, Flint tells Rebecca that he is having trouble adjusting his magic. Rebecca suddenly leans in close, calling out to Flint with an urgent expression. Rebecca whispers to Flint, asking if yesterday's mysterious explosion was caused by his magic practice. Flint sweats nervously, feigning ignorance at the sudden mention of a mysterious explosion sound. A flashback reveals the smoking, ruined forest caused by Flint's initial overgrown fire spell. Noelia had argued that his spell was an advanced explosion class, not a fire arrow. Flint had explained that he simply projected his imagination based on her spoken incantation. Emitting a flustered shout of denial, Noelia angrily corrects Flick, who is completely surprised by her sudden outburst. Flick ponders his miscalculated magical output, leaving Noelia utterly stunned and questioning his overwhelming level of power. Flick remarks on the visual similarity of his spell, while Noelia prepares to douse any accidental fires. Flick struggles to regulate his spell size, prompting Noelia to instruct him on visualizing proper scaling limits. Sitting at the counter, Flick inquires about magic practice restrictions, which the receptionist clarifies is not an issue. The receptionist warns Flick about heavy fines for unauthorized large-scale magic, much to his utter confusion. Noelia steps forward to confidently declare she will financially cover any damages resulting from Flick's magic. She presents a letter from her father, introducing a crucial document to resolve the situation. Noelia concludes her discussion at the counter, leaving Flick waiting for the guildmaster's final decision. Noelia shyly offers Flick a valuable sword from her father's collection as a token of gratitude. Flick sweat drops, realizing Noelia nearly admitted to stealing the highly valuable sword she is offering him. Flick politely declines the sword, leaving Noelia visibly startled and worried that he dislikes her gift. Flick warmly explains he prefers purchasing his own gear, politely accepting only her kind sentiments instead. Noelia insists her family's honor is at stake, urging Flick to find another way to accept gratitude. Flick proposes a clever alternative, asking Noelia to become his magic instructor instead of gifting him the sword. A blushing Noelia modestly doubts her teaching abilities, mentioning her life has revolved mostly around swordplay. Flick mentally acknowledges Noelia's elite status as a platinum-grade adventurer while adjusting his gloves. Noelia enthusiastically agrees to teach Flick, proposing they head to the outskirts for their training session. Noelia's warm, gentle smile completely dispels Flick's initial impression of her being a cold person. Out on the grassy fields, they reflect on the incredible lingering devastation caused by Flick's magic. Noelia clears her throat and leans in closely, catching Flick off guard with her sudden proximity. Noelia explains that Flick's unstable magical power stems from a flawed fundamental perception of magic. Flick explains his lifelong focus on the sword makes him view magic with unrealistic, exaggerated awe. Noelia explains that Flick's overwhelming mana reserve causes his overestimation of magic to manifest destructively. Noelia points out that Flick's spell failures are simply caused by a lack of proper visualization. Noelia confirms that Flick must fundamentally correct his perception of magic before his power can stabilize. Setting her staff aside, Noelia confidently promises to guide Flick through a method to correct it. Noelia initiates a magic synchronization by holding Flick's hands, guiding him to chant his spell. Flick closes his eyes and begins chanting the fire arrow incantation to prepare the spell. Entering Flick's synchronized consciousness, Noelia guides him to scale down his visualized fire arrow spell. Flick attempts to shrink his mental flame, but Noelia urges him to visualize an even smaller size. Noelia observes Flick's excessive visualization habits, noting the flame is still far too large. Flick concentrates deeply on shrinking the flame while Noelia monitors his progress to find the perfect size. After finding the ideal spell size, Noelia prompts Flick to successfully cast a perfectly controlled fire arrow. Overwhelmed with joy, Flick suddenly hugs Noelia tightly, leaving her completely stunned and heavily blushing. Spiraling eyes and a deep blush betray Noelia's immense embarrassment as she stammers praise. Noelia quietly asks Flick to let go, yet shyly admits she wouldn't mind if he held on longer. Panicking at his own forwardness, Flick hastily recoils, realizing hugging a noble daughter is highly inappropriate. Flick frantically apologizes while a deeply flustered Noelia gently assures him she understands his excitement. Noelia explains wand mechanics to Flick, offering him a staff just as a giant insect approaches. Noelia unleashes a powerful fire lance to demonstrate the vast mana required to cast wandless intermediate magic. A hostile swarm of giant ants emerges, provoked by the stray fire arrow cast earlier. Flick counts dozens of incoming monsters, which Noelia calmly suggests will serve as great target practice. Flick confidently charges forward, casting his newly mastered fire arrow spell directly at the target. The spell strikes true, unleashing a fiery explosion that instantly takes down the lead ant. Flick is thoroughly impressed as his magic easily penetrates the giant insect's durable armored shell. Noelia warns Flick not to get distracted, urging him to find a more efficient approach. Noelia suggests visualizing simultaneous multiple arrows, reminding Flick that magic adapts to the caster's imagination. Flick begins chanting a highly customized spell modification, leaving Noelia utterly shocked by his creativity. Flick grins confidently and requests Noelia's backup as he boldly tests his newly improvised spell. Flint raises his wand, shouting the incantation to launch a massive fire arrow barrage. A volley of fiery streaks rains down, instantly decimating the approaching giant ants. Noelia watches in complete astonishment, marveling at the sheer speed and power of his magic. Flint sheepishly wonders if he failed, while a flustered Noelia scolds him for ignoring her guidance. Noelia quickly clarifies she's deeply impressed, suggesting they report his new magic to the Research Institute. Flint decides adopting the Magic Swordsman title is the perfect disguise to avoid his past companion, Alphine. Grateful for her help, Flint proudly declares himself a magic swordsman and thanks her. Flint kneels, formally requesting Noelia to remain his magic instructor. Blushing with joy, Noelia happily promises to guide and assist him for years to come. Flint laughs, teasingly noting that her earnest response sounded like a marriage proposal. Returning to her family mansion, Noelia is greeted warmly by her personal maid, Susanna. In her bedroom, Noelia blushes happily while clutching Flint's cloak tightly to herself. Flustered chibi Noelia demands assistance with her team's scanning project. At the forest, Noelia begins her next lesson by explaining different categories of magic. Noelia outlines the 3 primary types of spells taught in standard magic textbooks. Noelia demonstrates basic attack magic, creating a small flame at the tip of her staff. She warns Flint that larger-scale spells require incredibly precise mana control to avoid disaster. Sweat-dropping, Flint nervously acknowledges her advice as he recalls his previous explosive failures. Noelia introduces support magic next, pointing out a basic cleaning spell in the textbook. She explains that support spells manipulate physical properties, making them harder to master. Noelia discusses various toxins, while Flint expresses a keen interest in learning pharmacology. Turning to healing magic, Noelia draws a small dagger to demonstrate its practical application. Noelia cuts her finger and swiftly casts a healing spell to mend the wound. Horrified, Flint angrily scolds her for recklessly harming her own skin just for a lesson. Touched by his genuine concern and manliness, a deeply flustered Noelia tries to compose herself. Back in her room, Noelia daydreamingly hugs Flint's cloak until Susanna suddenly enters. Startled, Noelia angrily demands that her maid knock before entering the room. Susanna defends herself, noting her master is anxious about Noelia's meetings with Flint. Susanna warns that spending time with a commoner could invite unwanted scrutiny for a noble. Noelia blushes furiously and frantically denies having any romantic relationship with him. Noelia tries to convince herself that Flint does not view her in that light. Susanna smiles mischievously, teasing Noelia about her obvious crush. Noelia continues to flusteredly deny her feelings while Susanna giggles at her reaction. Giggling, Susanna promises to help pave the way for Noelia's budding romance. Back in the forest, Flint snaps Noelia out of her deep blushing daydream. Flustered, Noelia insists she is fine and suggests they transition to practical magic training. Flint asks if he can enchant his sword, but Noelia explains that is highly advanced. Noelia demonstrates by trying to ignite a stone, explaining that magic easily disperses from inorganic objects. She notes that weapon enchantment is nearly impossible during active combat. Flint suggests asking his master Linus, head of the capital's magic research department, for advice. Flint suddenly freezes in panic, remembering that his past companion is in the capital. Wanting to avoid the capital, Flint nervously suggests they focus on basic magic first. Meanwhile, in the capital, Alphine sits on her bed, frustratingly wondering where Finn went. Alphine dismisses reports of Finn heading to the frontier, doubting he can survive alone. She looks bitterly at the sword Finn left behind, ignoring her companion's reassuring words. Alphine recalls the promise they made together on the day they became adventurers. She feels a deep pang of sorrow over his sudden quiet departure. Tightly clutching the sword, Alphine is overcome with grief and disbelief. Her butler knocks, reminding Alphine of her scheduled swordsmanship instruction at the palace. Composing herself, Alphine tells him she will be ready to depart shortly. Alphine clutches her sword, quietly hoping she will not cross paths with Finn. Flashing swords echo through Speed Harford Royal Castle as Alphine easily dominates her training partner. The knight gets forcefully blown backward, groaning in pain from her swift strike. Unimpressed by his performance, Alphine sighs while her opponent quickly admits defeat. Alphine glares in disappointment, annoyed that she had to hold back her true strength. The watching nobles applaud, praising her appropriate guidance as the esteemed sword saint. Hearing their voices, Alphine bitterly recalls how Finn would always keep fighting through tears. A handsome knight approaches, offering his applause and calling her the sword goddess. Newly arrived knight is formally introduced as Jair, captain of the Royal Knights. When Jair mockingly questions her about Finn, Alphine immediately puts her blade to his throat. Alphine demands he stop spreading baseless rumors and focus on his duties instead. Defending her former companion, Alphine insists Finn is only traveling to grow stronger. Jair smiles and offers himself as a confidant should she ever have any worries. To Alphine's visible disgust, Jair takes her hand and dramatically kisses it. Jair bids her farewell, leaving Alphine trembling in a state of absolute fury. Snapping in anger, Alphine declares a brutal training session against all the lazy nobles. Terrified screams echo from the castle as Alphine vents her immense frustration. Flint wakes up in his bed gasping, shaken by a terrible nightmare of Alphine. The haunting memories of his past training quickly make him feel sick to his stomach. Flint gasps and coughs violently over a wash basin, struggling to compose himself. Flint sighs in exhaustion, realizing his deep mental trauma is still not cured. Washing his face, Flint tries to reassure himself that he has left everything behind. Flint suddenly remembers his appointment to act as Noelia's escort for the survey team. Still looking unwell, Flint arrives at the meeting place and greets a cheerful Noelia. Noelia explains that they will be conducting a monster ecological survey in the forest today. A heavily armored bearded knight watches their interaction with deep calculating suspicion. Flint gulps nervously under the burly knight's intense and threatening aura. Sensing the tension, Noelia immediately grabs Flint's arm to pull him away. Noelia asserts that their escort request has begun, steering Flint away from the intimidating man. Noelia bluntly dismisses the protesting knight, revealing to Flint that the man is her father. Flint freezes in absolute shock, his eyes widening at the sudden, unexpected revelation. Noelia sternly scolds her father for failing to keep his promise to stay quiet. The burly man is formally identified as Margrave Lloyd, Lord of Huguenot. Flint sweat drops as he realizes he just witnessed a powerful lord being henpecked by his daughter. A playful interlude features a smiling Noelia asking for assistance with translation projects. Deep in the forest, Noelia begins her lesson by explaining the different types of magic. Noelia outlines the 3 main categories of spells described in standard textbooks. Noelia demonstrates basic magic, creating a small flame at the tip of her staff. She warns that larger-scale spells require incredibly precise control to avoid disaster. Sweat dropping, Flint nervously acknowledges her advice as he remembers his previous explosive failures. Noelia introduces support magic next, pointing out a basic cleaning spell in the textbook. She explains that support spells manipulate physical properties, making them harder to master. Turning the page, Flint expresses a keen interest in eventually learning pharmacology. Introducing healing magic, Noelia draws a small dagger to demonstrate its practical application. Noelia deliberately cuts her finger and swiftly casts a healing spell to mend the wound. Horrified, Flint angrily scolds her for recklessly harming her own skin just for a lesson. Touched by his genuine concern, Noelia blushes intensely and tries to compose herself. Back in her bedroom, Noelia daydreamingly hugs Flint's cloak until her maid suddenly enters. Startled, Noelia angrily demands that her maid knock before entering the room. Susanna identifies herself as the maid of the household and mentions Lloyd is anxious about Flint. Susanna warns Noelia that traveling with a male commoner will invite unwanted scrutiny to her noble house. Flustered, Noelia loudly denies having any romantic connection with Flick, leaving him thoroughly bewildered. Noelia sadly admits that Flick does not view her romantically, a realization that visibly disheartens her. Susanna gasps in absolute delight as she realizes Noelia is indeed harboring secret romantic feelings. Susanna teasingly presses her about her crush, prompting a blushing Noelia to furiously protest her innocence. Susanna cheerfully promises to assist Noelia's romantic efforts before leaving the panicked noble girl behind. Flick suddenly breaks Noelia's daydreaming, startling her into a flustered, wide-eyed panic. Trying to cover her embarrassment, Noelia hastily suggests transitioning their magic lessons into practical outdoor practice. Flick asks about weapon enchantment, but Noelia warns him that channeling magic into inorganic weapons is highly difficult. Noelia demonstrates how magic quickly disperses off physical objects by casting a failing flame spell on a simple rock. Noelia explains that dynamic weapon enchantment during combat is nearly impossible without long, complex ritual preparations. Flick suggests they consult his former master, Linus, leads the capital's magic research department. Mention of the capital triggers Flick's deep anxiety, causing him to sweat nervously and deflect the topic. Flick secretly resolves to avoid the capital entirely, focusing instead on mastering basic magic with Noelia. Back in the capital, Alphine sits in bed wondering where Finn could have gone after 2 weeks. Alphine doubts Finn can survive in the harsh frontier without her powerful reputation and connections. Alphine angrily recalls advice to treat Finn better, questioning why he abandoned the expensive sword she bought him. She remembers their early days when they promised to stand side by side as successful adventurers forever. Alphine's harsh exterior cracks, revealing deep sorrow over Finn's sudden and silent abandonment. Squeezing the discarded weapon tightly, Alphine refuses to accept that their bond is truly broken. An elderly butler interrupts her thoughts, reminding her of her scheduled swordsmanship instruction at the royal palace. Alphine agrees to depart, heading off to prepare for her official duties at the palace. Alphine deeply sighs, secretly hoping she won't cross paths with a certain troublesome person at the palace. At the Grand Hartford Royal Castle, the sharp clashing of training swords echoes through the air. Proud royal knight is violently knocked off balance, grunting in pain as he is defeated. The defeated knight surrenders in awe, while Alphine unimpressedly remarks on the lack of worthy opponents. Alphine hides her burning frustration, knowing she could have easily finished the training match in a single blow. The surrounding nobles slack off, treating this serious training as a mere social formality to Alphine's disgust. She bitterly compares them to Finn, who would relentlessly train for 100 rounds despite crying and vomiting. The blonde knight Captain Jair approaches Alphine with slick flattery, which she immediately and coldly dismisses. Jair arrogantly downplays her swordsmanship style as mere child's play for a naturally talented fighter like himself. Jair maliciously mentions rumors of Finn abandoning Alphine and fleeing the capital, striking a painful nerve. Infuriated, Alphine snaps at Jair to stop gossiping and pick up a sword to back up his arrogance. Alphine proudly defends Finn, claiming he only left to grow strong enough to stand by her side again. Jair falsely offers to comfort her, insincerely reminding her of her high standing as the kingdom's proud sword. Jair boldly kisses Alphine's hand while declaring his love, leaving her deeply startled and repulsed. As Jair tearfully waves goodbye, Alphine stands frozen, trembling with a volatile mixture of disgust and rage. Unleashing her terrifying rage, Alphine commands all 100 slacking knights to attack her simultaneously in a brutal free-for-all. As the castle fills with the knights' terrified screams, Alphine silently begs Finn to return before she slaughters them. Far away in the frontier, Flick abruptly wakes up in a cold sweat after experiencing a horrifying nightmare. The lingering trauma of Alphine's brutal training regimes makes Flick physically gag as the memory hits him. Flick sighs heavily, realizing that the deep emotional trauma from his past life is still not fully healed. Splashing cold water on his face, Flick desperately tells himself to get a grip and move forward. Flick suddenly remembers his duty for the day, acting as Noelia's personal escort for an ecological survey. Meeting Noelia outside, Flick blames his tired appearance on a bad dream, assuring her he is physically fine. Noelia warmly thanks him, explaining that they will be conducting a specialized monster ecological survey today. The professional escorts eye Flick curiously, noting his unusually sharp presence and impressive gear. Noelia's father, Lloyd, glares at Flick with a terrifyingly protective aura, making the young warrior gulp in fear. Noelia quickly steps in, announcing that the escort request has officially begun to rescue Flick from her father. Noelia bluntly tells Flick to ignore her father's protests, walking away while leaving the stern warrior completely speechless. Noelia threatens to send her father back to the manor if he cannot keep his promise to stay quiet, causing the Margrave to groan in defeat while Flick watches nervously. A system box formally introduces Noelia's stressed father as Margrave Lloyd, the Lord of Huguenot. Flick is completely shocked to realize that the legendary Margrave of Huguenot is being bossed around by his own daughter. In a playful interlude, Noelia warmly asks readers to join their online server and assist with translation projects. Two heavily armored knights walk silently through the dense forest, guarding the survey team. Flick sweat drops, finding the silent and tense atmosphere of the escort mission incredibly awkward. Flick worries that his inability to hold back his powerful magic will make him a burden to the survey team. Margrave Lloyd sighs in exhaustion, lamenting his aging body as he struggles to traverse the rugged forest path. Noticing the Margrave's physical struggle, Flick turns around and calls out to Noelia. Flick suggests helping the struggling Margrave, but Noelia declines, explaining her father was once a proud platinum-class adventurer who hates being assisted. Flick silently observes Noelia walking ahead, realizing she and her father do not seem to be on very good terms. When Margrave Lloyd furiously accuses Flick of flirting, Flick swiftly casts a silence spell to cut off his loud shouting. As Noelia scolds her father, Flick suddenly senses a threat and warns them that something is rapidly approaching from the rustling bushes. As a massive beast lunges with bared fangs, Flick draws his sword and tells the knights to protect Noelia and the Margrave. The lead knight quickly obeys Flick's command while a sharp metallic slash cuts through the air. An enormous predatory forest wolf emerges from the foliage, identified as a particularly large specimen. Noelia calls out to Flick, requesting him to tone down his magic so they can capture the beasts alive for their survey. Flick agrees to hold back his magic, though he silently wishes he possessed a higher quality sword to subdue the beasts physically. Margrave Lloyd and his knights fiercely engage the lunging forest wolves, striking them down with precise physical blows. The armored knights handle the smaller wolves, leaving the largest boss wolf to Flick. Flick confronts the massive leader of the pack, realizing that defeating it will cause the rest of the wolves to scatter. With a thunderous snarl, the forest wolf lunges, but Flick swiftly sidesteps the attack with ease. Noelia calls out to Flick as he realizes that the giant beast's movements are incredibly slow compared to Alfine's ferocious speed. Flick shouts in determination as he agilely maneuvers through the lunging wolves to set up his next move. With a sharp, clean strike, Flick slashes the giant forest wolf, causing it to let out a painful whine. After Flick strikes down the beast, Noelia supports him with a spell, and the two share a warm, victorious smile. Seeing their leader defeated, the remaining forest wolves turn and flee, whimpering into the woods. To stop the retreating beast, Noelia casts a sleep spell, conjuring a magical cloud that quickly envelops the wolves. The knights cheer as the forest wolves collapse into a deep slumber, allowing the team to easily capture them. The two armored knights carry the bound, sleeping forest wolves back on a long wooden pole. Flick sighs in dismay as he inspects his chipped sword, realizing he needs to sharpen it yet again. Sighing over his cheap, damaged weapon, Flick notes that he must invest in a much better sword soon. As night falls around the campsite, Knight Captain Mice observes that Flick seems highly experienced with outdoor survival. Caught off guard, Flick looks up as Mice approaches him politely to formally introduce himself. Handing Flick a warm drink, the friendly Knight Captain introduces himself as Mice, commander of the Margrave's forces. When Mice mentions Flick has only been an adventurer for a month, Flick attributes his skills to escorting merchants, hoping his cover story holds. Although Mice laughs and accepts the explanation, his eyes briefly narrow with calculating suspicion as Flick sighs in relief. Flick commends Mice's unit, recalling that the elite royal knights he previously knew were completely useless at outdoor survival. Flick is astonished to learn that the Margrave's knights are actually veteran platinum-class adventurers who specialize in survival. Flick finds it remarkable that a high-ranking noble like the Margrave gladly employs commoner adventurers within his elite knighthood. Mice explains that Margrave Lloyd disregards class barriers because he himself rose from being a common adventurer to a noble lord. Flick admits his ignorance about the Margrave's history, prompting Mice to note that the younger generation rarely knows of the past. Mice's expression grows somber as he explains that most veteran adventurers who witnessed the past perished during the Great Invasion. A historical narration describes the Great Invasion 20 years ago, when terrifying creatures known as Abyss Walkers devastated the kingdom. The tragic calamity left deep scars across the land, claiming the lives of Flick and Alfine's families when they were infants. Because of the immense trauma, people avoid speaking of the invasion that forced the mobilization of countless adventurers to protect the realm. Mice reveals he fought alongside Lloyd and Florina in their original party, prompting Flick to ask if he also battled the beasts. When Flick asks about Florina, Mice warmly clarifies that she was Noelia's late mother and a key member of their party. Mice shares how Florina, a noble runaway who became a brilliant frontier mage, found her destiny with them until the tragic invasion occurred. To ensure Noelia was born in safety, Lloyd joined Florina's noble family, allowing Flick to piece together the tragic history of Noelia's lineage. Mice recounts how Noelia's mother courageously joined the combat unit immediately after giving birth to ensure their survival. Flick is struck by the sudden realization that Noelia, much like himself, lost her mother in the Great Invasion. Flick silently notes that her deep connection to magic likely stems from roots very similar to his own. Mice fondly explains that Noelia inherited her mother's lively nature, predicting she will grow up to be just as beautiful. Mice suggests their strained relationship would improve if Lloyd and Noelia were simply more honest with each other. Observing the night sky, Flick begins to piece together the timeline of Noelia's birth and age. Flick is left utterly dumbfounded when Mice casually mentions that Noelia is turning 20 this year. Blushing slightly, Flick is shocked to discover that Noelia is actually the exact same age as him. While Flick sweat drops over treating her like a child, Mice laughs at how deceptive her baby face is. Mice silently studies Flick with a sharp, calculating gaze, sensing there is more to the young man. When Mice comments on his mature demeanor, Flick nervously laughs it off, attributing his calm attitude to merchant escorts. Mice assures Flick he is being too modest, explaining how Lloyd supports capable young adventurers seeking a name. The heavy footsteps of Margrave Lloyd startle Flick as the imposing lord suddenly approaches their quiet campfire. Flick instinctively tenses up and acts defensively, completely overwhelmed by the Margrave's incredibly menacing and heavy aura. Lloyd abruptly offers a sturdy sword to Flick, gruffly instructing the young swordsman to use it during the survey. Noting the damage on Flick's current weapon, Lloyd insists that a proper swordsman must carry a high-quality sword. Flick immediately recognizes that the weapon Lloyd is offering him is an exceptionally rare and expensive sword. Flick desperately tries to decline the generous gift, stammering that he cannot possibly compensate Lloyd for it. Despite Flick's persistent efforts to return the weapon, Lloyd gruffly waves his hand and dismisses his protests. Lloyd explains his generosity toward capable swordsmen, reassuring Flick that no compensation is expected, even if it breaks. Mice chuckles warmly, pointing out that Lloyd is far more determined than usual to support a young talent. Mice suddenly reveals that this specific sword is only awarded to elite individuals appointed as knights. Flick panics in utter horror, loudly protesting that he absolutely cannot accept a weapon meant for official knights. Flick desperately realizes that accepting knighthood would trigger background checks, exposing his fake name to Alphine. When Flick continues to refuse, Lloyd glares at him with deep dissatisfaction, demanding he simply accept the weapon. Noelia steps forward and calmly advises Flick to just accept it, knowing her stubborn father won't back down. Noelia reassures Flick of the sword's fine quality, jokingly offering to throw it back at her father later. When Lloyd tries to angrily bark at his daughter, Noelia instantly shuts him down with a stern command. Noelia strictly scolds her silenced, blushing father for shouting, making Flick actually feel a bit sorry for him. Relieved to find a compromise, Flick happily agrees to merely borrow the sword for the duration of the survey. As Lloyd's silent spell finally wears off, his angry shouting echoes through the night, ending their second day. On the third morning, Flick and Mice move cautiously through the dense forest, sensing a sudden change ahead. Mice warns that two large, troublesome creatures are blocking the path to their scheduled investigation site. Flick agilely leaps into a tree, offering to guard the rear while Mice handles the threat ahead. Flick quietly spots a pair of massive red dragonettes resting near a tree, keeping his presence hidden. Flick worries that a dragonette's loud roar will attract other beasts, wishing he had a way to silence them. Remembering how Noelia silenced her father, Flick realizes he can use the exact same spell on the dragons. Flick successfully casts silence bubbles over both dragonettes, ensuring they cannot make a sound when he attacks. Leaping from above, Flick delivers a powerful slash, thrilled to confirm his silence spell completely muffled the beast's roar. With a final clean strike, Flick swiftly neutralizes the dragonette, letting out a sigh of relief. Arriving at the scene, Margrave Lloyd is deeply impressed to see the beast's head cleanly sliced with perfect precision. Lloyd highly praises Flick's immense skill, noting the pristine scales and wing webbings will fetch a high price. Mice and his knights run over in admiration, relieved that defeating the dragonettes has caused nearby beasts to scatter. Flick smiles happily, feeling proud that he has finally proven his worth as a competent escort. Flick sweat drops in surprise when the delicate Noelia eagerly reveals her unexpected love for eating dragonette meat. The survey team finally arrives at the investigation site where a researcher detects a strong release of mana. Though the serene forest glen looks incredibly beautiful, a heavy presence of magical beasts lingers in the air. Noelia casts a powerful sanctuary barrier around the area to keep any dangerous magical beast from intruding. With the barrier safely established, the survey team begins collecting water samples and conducting their research. The investigation reveals that a recent earthquake damaged an underground water vein, causing highly concentrated mana to leak. The mustache researcher explains that water gushed out from the ground, attracting dangerous monsters. Flick quietly gazes toward the demonic forest, contemplating the newly uncovered soil path ahead. Noelia confidently reassures Flick that sealing the gushing water vein will resolve the monster outbreaks. While the knights prepare camp, lingering memories of ancient abyss walkers keep them alert. Noelia warmly presents her freshly prepared camp food to a pleasantly surprised Flick. Flick is highly impressed by the delicious-looking camp meal Noelia has prepared for him. Noelia apologizes for the simple meal, but Flick gratefully accepts the freshly prepared sandwich. Sitting beside Flick, Noelia wishes she could have cooked a much grander mansion feast. Flick happily takes a large bite, expressing his deep gratitude for her camp cooking. With her heart beating in rapid thumps, a heavily blushing Noelia watches Flick intently as he eats. Flick highly praises the perfectly salted dragonette sandwich, completely flustering Noelia with his compliments. Flick admits he usually cooks for himself, surprised that a noble lady prepared this. Noelia explains that Flick's perfect preparation of the dragonette meat made the cooking exceptionally delicious. Flick explains the culinary importance of completely draining blood from dragonettes to prevent bad odors. Flick sweat drops, recalling a chaotic past lesson where Alphine stubbornly refused to drain beast blood. Flick notes that Alphine's absolute incompetence at household chores force him to become an expert cook. Margrave Lloyd suddenly emerges from the shadows of the trees, interrupting their quiet camp dinner. Noelia defensively steps up to ask her stern father what business he has with them. Flick politely returns the masterfully crafted sword, explaining his rental agreement has successfully concluded. Lloyd sighs in frustration at Flick's stubborn refusal, reiterating that the young man should keep it. Noelia strictly lectures her father, urging him to accept Flick's refusal gracefully like a man. Flick clarifies that he wishes to commission a custom sword perfectly suited to his style. Inspired by Lloyd's advice, Flick plans to borrow funds to forge a custom sword. Lloyd thoughtfully offers to connect Flick with a master blacksmith capable of forging his ideal sword. Lloyd promises the sword as a reward with no strings attached, prompting Flick to accept. Lloyd suddenly grabs Flick, warning him with a terrifyingly menacing glare about a crucial condition. Noelia blushes in shock as Lloyd declares he will never hand his daughter over to Flick. Enraged by the awkward situation, Lloyd roars for silence, though observers note the family's underlying affection. The scene shifts to Alphine sitting completely alone at a massive empty dining table. Alphine sighs deeply, realizing it has already been a full month since Phil left. Walking alone, Alphine begins to reflect on the painful reasons why Finn chose to leave. With a somber expression, Alphine admits to herself that she had been incredibly spoiled. Alphine recalls their childhood together, realizing she foolishly assumed Finn would tolerate her behavior forever. Alphine regrets her possessive lies and short temper, which she used to keep Finn isolated. Tears begin to softly drip onto her plate as Alphine deeply apologizes for hurting Finn. Overwhelmed with regret, Alphine weeps, wishing she had simply been honest about her feelings. A sudden knock sounds at the door as an aide announces an urgent report. The butler reveals that the Adventurers Guild has uncovered new developments in Finn's search. Alphine gasps in shock as she learns a man carrying Finn's platinum insignia is detained. Alphine questions how they identified the insignia, prompting her butler to explain it is classified. The butler asks Alphine to keep his upcoming explanation an absolute secret, which she accepts. Alphine firmly swears on her sword to never reveal the classified secrets she learns. The butler accepts her solemn vow, preparing to disclose the truth about the insignias. A detailed diagram illustrates how high-rank insignias feature hidden personal engravings to prevent identity theft. Alphine is stunned by this secret identification system, which only elite nobles know about. Realizing high-ranking adventurers are supervised, Alphine confirms the detained man carries Finn's exact engraving. Learning the man has been transferred to Algren, Alphine contemplates whether she must go. Clenching her fist, Alphine desperately asks if Finn might actually be residing in Algren. The butler agrees there's merit in going, prompting Alphine to request a vacation. Deciding to stop brooding in her estate, Alphine takes a decisive step forward to find Finn. Resolving to find Finn, Alphine makes a firm decision to head to Algren. Meanwhile, Flick returns to the guild, instantly drawing the nervous attention of surrounding adventurers. Overhearing their whispers, Flick realizes his recent combat accomplishments are already spreading through rumors. Flick looks back in confusion as local adventurers quietly gossip about his legendary power. The guild receptionist frantically calls Flick over to the counter to complete his paperwork quickly. Flick politely agrees and makes his way over, leaving the other adventurers sweating in awe. Arriving at the desk, Flick silently notes how incredibly intimidated everyone still behaves around him. The receptionist explains that his massive consecutive magical feats have naturally terrified local adventurers. She adds that receiving a sword directly from the Margrave makes him sound incredibly dangerous. Flick tries to downplay his power only to learn Noelia already shared his achievements. The clerk reveals veteran warning rumors while other adventurers marvel at Flick decapitating a dragonette. The receptionist reassures a sweat-dropping Flick that his terrifying reputation is just standard adventurer respect. After confirming his submittal materials, the receptionist asks Flick to present his current adventurer insignia. Flick looks on in surprise as the receptionist presents a shiny new insignia to him. The receptionist excitedly congratulates Flick on his official promotion to the bronze adventure rank. Flick happily admires his newly pinned bronze insignia, grateful for the increased earning potential. Flick is highly perplexed when the receptionist informs him of a personal quest request. Flick reacts in absolute shock upon learning the mysterious, whimsical client is Margrave Lloyd. The receptionist presents the official document, instructing Flick to visit the Margrave's estate directly. Flick confirms he already knows the estate's location, leaving the receptionist looking slightly surprised. Flick warily requests to hear the details before accepting, which the receptionist cheerfully understands. Flick soon arrives before the massive, heavily fortified gates of Margrave Lloyd's grand estate. Mice warmly greets Flick at the gates, offering to guide him inside for his meeting. Walking through the hallways, Flick silently observes the austere decor and historical suits of armor. Mice notices Flick looking around and asks if the non-luxurious estate design surprises him. Mice explains that Lloyd prefers investing in soldiers, stockpiling weapons, and defending the people. Mice reveals they actively prepare for potential future invasions despite other nobles mocking their efforts. Flick's sincere praise of the Margrave's practical nature deeply touches and pleases a smiling Mice. Mice quietly reflects on the immense, unseen burdens that Margrave Lloyd constantly carries alone. Reaching the private chambers, Mice knocks on the door and announces Flick's arrival. Noelia warmly welcomes Flick inside the meeting room, inviting him to sit for private discussions. After Mice politely departs, Flick immediately asks the Margrave about his specific quest details. Lloyd reminds Flick of their previous blacksmith conversation, suggesting he finally order a custom sword. Lloyd requests Flick to deliver his personal sword for repairs, facilitating the introduction to the blacksmith. Lloyd touches his forehead, warning Flick that the exclusive blacksmith possesses an incredibly difficult personality. A detailed map outlines the blacksmith's workshop located in a perilous region near the demonic forest. Lloyd describes the blacksmith as a massive, intensely energetic individual of absolute, unstoppable vigor. Flick's sweat drops in deep concern when Lloyd mentions the blacksmith rides a terrifyingly mysterious contraption. Looking toward a sipping Noelia, Flick wonders if she knows anything about this mysterious vehicle. Noelia completely ignores Flick's silent, sweating inquiry and calmly continues to sip her tea. Guaranteeing the blacksmith's exceptional craft, Lloyd hands over the official map to the workshop. Lloyd looks directly at Flick with a serious expression, asking if he accepts the job. Recognizing the incredible opportunity to obtain his ideal weapon, Flick humbly accepts the request. Noelia casually invites Flick to dinner, adding she will guide him, shocking her father. Lloyd slams his hands down, furiously protesting Noelia traveling alone with Flick once again. Despite his loud protests, they share an incredibly tense and silent dinner under Lloyd's fuming glare. Back in her room, Noelia happily blushes while contemplating her travel outfits for the trip. Noelia's maid snaps her out of her deep daydream, noticing her completely distracted state. Noelia turns bright red and panics when her maid teasingly asks if she was thinking about Flick. Noelia desperately stammers in denial, completely unaware her clear romantic feelings are totally obvious. Noelia sheepishly agrees as her maid Susanna reveals she sees through her, asking Noelia to stop silencing her father. Noelia reacts in panic when Susanna points out that her father has seemingly taken a liking to Flick. Noelia happily wonders if her father's rare smile is due to Flick's skills, while Susanna is glad her arrangements paid off. Noelia reflects that while her father acknowledges Flick's greatness, he is not yet convinced of him as a son-in-law. Noelia daydreams about Flick kneeling before her and passionately swearing to protect her for the rest of his life. Noelia clutches her burning cheeks, scolding herself for having such delusions since Flick already declined the sword. Noelia secretly harbors romantic expectations of being embraced by Flick's sturdy arms and captured by his kind gaze. A sudden question from Susanna snaps a startled Noelia out of her deep thoughts about Flick. Noelia sadly considers herself selfish for wishing her romantic feelings would be reciprocated despite their mismatched social statuses. Susanna tries to comfort Noelia and offer help, but Noelia desperately grabs her arm and commands her to stop. Noelia falls to her knees, tearfully pleading with Susanna to not meddle because she is content with their current relationship. Gently cradling Noelia's tearful face, Susanna silently notes how endearing yet incredibly awkward her young mistress is. Susanna warmly embraces Noelia, comforting her by noting that her stubborn awkwardness is just like her father's. Susanna gently pats Noelia's head, reminding her to rest well before her journey begins tomorrow. Snuggled under her covers, Noelia blushes intensely and whispers Flick's name as she drifts off to sleep. Arriving at the Grand Canyon, Flick extends his gloved hand to guide Noelia forward. Noelia blushes deeply and shyly thanks Flick as she prepares to accept his help. Looking around the rocky canyon, Flick mentions that he has never traveled to this side before. Noelia gazes nervously at Flick's back before calling out to get his attention. Noelia shyly invites Flick to view the beautiful scenery on the other side of a nearby cabin.
Flick readily agrees to her invitation, causing Noelia to light up with excitement.
Noelia eagerly runs ahead while Flick happily notes how exceptionally cheerful she seems today. Noelia grabs Flick's hand to guide him, excitedly directing him toward the scenic spot. Running toward the edge, Noelia eagerly points out the upcoming panoramic view from the cliff. A sudden slip on the loose rocks causes Noelia to gasp as Flick desperately reaches out to catch her. Flick pulls Noelia safely against him, warning her to be careful, while Noelia blushes and stammers an apology. Noelia's heart pounds wildly as she marvels at how effortlessly Flick holds her with his strong, sturdy arms. Flick gently asks if she can stand, while Noelia worries he might hear her racing heartbeat. Blushing deeply, Noelia shyly asks Flick to continue holding her so she doesn't fall. Flick beams with a warm, cheerful smile and readily agrees to keep holding her. Flick warmly pulls Noelia closer against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around her. Admiring the majestic canyon, Flick agrees that the view is absolutely spectacular. Flick admits he has never seen such a breathtaking sight in his entire life. Noelia points out the river below, explaining that it completely submerges the canyon during rare floods. As they discuss nature's unpredictable wonders, a sudden close look from Flick makes Noelia's heart race. Noelia panics internally and turns bright red as their eyes lock in an intimate moment. Noelia spots a tattoo on Flick's neck, curiously asking if it represents an ear of wheat. Caught completely off guard, Flick panics and quickly covers his neck in embarrassment. Noelia admits she never noticed the mark before, leaving Flick sweating as he scrambles for an explanation. Flick lies that the tattoo is a hometown health charm that weakens when others look at it. Noelia deduces that this is why he covers his neck, and a relieved Flick eagerly agrees. Flick silently recalls that his orphanage director gave him the tattoo to hide its dangerous origins. Flick inquires with the receptionist Rebecca about making a money transfer through the guild. Rebecca explains that the service is common for adventurers who wish to send earnings home. Flick expresses his relief as Rebecca assures him the guild staff handled transfer securely. Rebecca hands him the forms, but Flick hesitates, realizing his fake name will confuse his orphanage. As Rebecca instructs him where to sign, Flick realizes he cannot use his real name. Flick puts his pen down and asks if he can send the funds anonymously. Rebecca explains he can send it anonymously under the guild's official support fund program. Rebecca notes a fixed fee applies, which Flick happily accepts to protect his identity. Rebecca asks Flick to proceed with the registration immediately, and he readily agrees. Rebecca counts the coins to confirm the payment and paperwork, prompting a relieved Flick to express his gratitude before mentioning his next destination as a workshop in Yasubo's hunting ground. Rebecca is surprised to learn that Flick is heading to Gawain's workshop, and he confirms that he accepted the request. While acknowledging Gawain's exceptional blacksmithing skills, Flick recalls the Margrave warning him about the man's eccentric personality, hoping for a peaceful journey. Rebecca curiously inquires about the nature of the Yasuba hunting grounds. Flick expresses concern over the name of the hunting grounds, but Rebecca reassures him that his skills will easily overcome any danger. Flick is highly bewildered when Rebecca suddenly repeats her reassurance word for word. Flick continues to wonder about Rebecca's strange repetition as she cheerfully waves and wishes him a safe trip. A distracted Flick snaps out of his thoughts when Noelia calls his name, quickly apologizing and suggesting they continue moving. Noelia sadly remarks that it is a shame, and Flick quietly agrees with her sentiment. Noelia pants heavily as she struggles to keep up with Flick's walking pace. Noticing Noelia is exhausted from the fast pace, Flick starts to check on her but suddenly spots a monster above and shouts a warning for her to get down. Flick shields Noelia from the sudden aerial assault of a giant hostile gale eagle. Flick quickly chants and unleashes an airblade spell to strike down the attacking beast. Flick is frustrated and shocked when the agile eagle successfully evades his magical attack. Noelia cries out in deep concern as Flick prepares to face the beast again. Noelia asks Flick what magic he will choose against a swift-flying foe, prompting him to formulate his own strategy. Flick chants a defensive spell, causing Noelia to gasp in surprise as she feels the wind rapidly gather around him. Flick manifests a powerful wind barrier that directly blocks the charging eagle's physical assault. Having trapped the eagle against his barrier, Flick smiles and notes he cannot miss from this distance, leaving a stunned Noelia to agree. Noelia marvels at Flick's creative use of a defensive projectile barrier for offense, deciding she must document this unique method in her notebook. Flick wonders if his magical methods are too unusual, but Noelia warmly assures him that his flexible thinking is actually a wonderful trait. Noelia explains that his swordsman background keeps his magic flexible, and she encourages him to use her spells freely, which he promises to do responsibly. Flick contemplates his gloved hand, admitting that combat distance for magic still feels unfamiliar to him. Noelia notes that Flick is highly adept at close-quarters combat, which she believes is a great strength. Flick explains his weakness in conceptualizing long-range attacks, prompting a curious response from Noelia. Noelia advises Flick to utilize his dual talent by fighting at whatever distance feels most comfortable to him. Noelia clarifies that magic should simply be a tool for when close-range combat fails, which Flick thoughtfully acknowledges. Noelia reminds Flick about her advice on flexibility, pointing out that his entire fighting style should follow the same principle. Noelia explains that he does not need to limit himself to traditional swordsmanship or conventional magic. Noelia points out that his combination of endless sword training and rare magical talent allows him to reach a unique state of combat. Flick realizes that he can forge a brand new path of combat tailored uniquely to his own skills. Noelia warmly encourages him, expressing absolute confidence that he will become a legendary magic swordsman known throughout the kingdom. Flick chuckles sheepishly at her praise while a giggling Noelia pulls out their map to check their travel progress. Flick silently marvels at Noelia's vast knowledge and wonders how much effort she put in to achieve her platinum rank. Noelia eagerly announces their imminent arrival at the hunting grounds and sets off, with Flick hurriedly calling after her. A promotional scanlation notice recruits Japanese translators and invites readers to join their online community server. A vibrant chapter cover displays the main characters of the series alongside the scanlation credits. A scenic view introduces Chapter 10, set in the snowy mountain region of the Algren mining city. Arriving in the city, Alphine notes with concern that the entire area is heavily covered in thick smoke. The butler explains that the city's non-stop furnaces fuel a thriving mineral economy, earning it the nickname of the City of Smoke and Ash. Alphine quietly acknowledges the information, understanding why the refining industry in Algren is so prosperous. Butler continues to explain how Algren's extensive refining and exporting have shaped its development. While the city has grown into a major hub, the butler notes that a severe wealth gap has recently become highly noticeable. Despite the impoverished surroundings, a group of local children plays and laughs together happily. Alphine hopes that her former partner Finn is nearby, resolving to apologize sincerely and part amicably if they meet. She sadly reflects on her plan to finally return to the capital after settling things with him. A receptionist warmly greets Alphine and offers to guide her inside to address her specific inquiry. The guide brings Alphine to a jail cell, ordering a lazy, complaining prisoner to stand up and face his visitors. The defensive prisoner protests his innocence, but Alphine sternly confronts him about falsifying his identity with a platinum insignia to mimic the adventurer she is searching for. Alphine glares intensely at the prisoner and firmly demands his cooperation in her search. The prisoner terrifiedly confesses that he found the platinum insignia on a slumped-over man in the slums, shocking Alphine. Prisoner recalls that the mysterious slumped-over man was a small-framed youth with rare, dark hair. The prisoner remembers the dark-haired youth lying sick and barely breathing in a pile of trash. Furious, Alphine grabs the prisoner through the bars and aggressively demands to know what happened to the man. The prisoner explains that 6 slum dwellers are taken to the church while the receptionist claims she knows nothing more. Sighing, Alphine asks the prisoner why he chose to steal the insignia and falsify his identity. The prisoner defenselessly explains that he hoped to benefit from a platinum-class identity to escape his harsh slum life. Alphine asks the receptionist if the prisoner's story is true, who confirms it as the prisoner begs for belief. The receptionist explains that while many are taken to the church daily, the guild does not manage everyone there. The receptionist gently asks a solemn Alphine if she would like to visit the church immediately. Alphine agrees, and the receptionist instructs them to wait at the guild entrance while she contacts the church. As they walk, the butler notes the description matches Finn and offers to lead Alphine to the church. Alphine confidently dismisses the butler's suspicion, insisting Finn would never fall ill here despite the matching dark hair. The butler and Alphine arrive at the gloomy alleyway where the dark-haired man likely collapsed. Crouching by the trash, Alphine sadly wonders if Finn collapsed all alone in such a dismal, shaded place. The butler explains how environmental and mental stress can sicken anyone, while Alphine blames herself for Finn's suffering. Alphine notices a couple of suspicious idling ruffians drinking and smoking nearby in the alley. The butler and Alphine observe the widespread unemployment and idle crowds filling the impoverished district. The butler warns Alphine about the poor public order, advising they hurry to the church to avoid trouble. Alphine accidentally bumps into a young twin-tailed girl and quickly apologizes, with the girl reassuring her she is unhurt. The girl runs off with a quick smile after expressing her relief at Alphine's safety. Alphine catches the girl by her hood, politely asking for her stolen pouch back as the girl nervously denies taking it. A boy named Yuri intervenes to scold Liz, who tearfully protests that she must steal just to eat. The butler points out how difficult it is for drifters like these children to make an honest living. Kneeling down, Alphine gently tells Liz that food bought with stolen money will never taste good. Alphine offers to apologize with Liz, while Yuri holds Liz's hand and promises to work hard so she never hungers.
Alphine is deeply moved and stunned by the young boy's protective declaration.
Alphine flashes back to her childhood days, hearing her name being called near an old building. The memory shows a young Alphine huddled in a corner, crying alone. Young Finn holds her hands, promising to grow strong and protect her so she never has to cry. Young Finn smiles warmly as Alphine asks if his sweet promise is truly real. Snapping back to the present, Alphine receives her pouch back as the children bow and apologize. Alphine pats Liz's head, encouraging them to stay close, and the happy children run off together. Watching them go, Alphine reflects on her own inability to be honest and wishes she could apologize as easily. Alphine urges the butler to hurry, realizing she had grown spoiled and overly reliant on her childhood friend. At the church, the nun welcomes them, and Alphine and the butler explain they are searching for the dark-haired man. The nun confirms receiving a rare dark-haired man, but reveals he had already passed away before arriving. Panicked Alphine demands if Finn is dead, as the nun confirms the unidentified body rests in a coffin downstairs. Devastated, Alphine weeps into her hands, realizing she may never see Finn again, to apologize. The butler clarifies that the body has not been buried yet, which the nun confirms is true. The nun explains that unidentified remains are kept for a set period, and this man's deadline is tomorrow. The butler and the nun ask Alphine if she will proceed to identify the body to confirm if it is Finn. Alphine hesitates, thinking she could avoid the painful truth by refusing to look inside the coffin. Deciding she cannot keep running away from troublesome things, Alphine requests to confirm the remains. The nun opens the heavy wooden door, leading Alphine and the butler into the dark tomb containing the coffin. Walking forward, Alphine desperately prays to God that the deceased man inside is anyone other than Finn. The nun mourns that the body is severely damaged from being exposed to scavenging mice and crows for days. Alphine insists she is ready while the nun offers a quiet prayer for the dead before opening the coffin. The coffin is opened, revealing the decayed and scarred shoulder of a body wearing Finn's familiar cloak and clasp. Alphine suffers from a severe coughing fit, gasping in pain as her butler asks if she is all right. Alphine catches her breath and reassures her butler that she is fine and ready to make the confirmation. Looking at the body, Alphine notes the corpse is about the same height as Finn and wears identical clothes, though she realizes they are common items from an equipment store. Although his hairstyle is similar and rare, Alphine hesitates to confirm if it is Finn, noting there must be others like him. Alphine suddenly remembers that Finn had a unique tattoo of an ear of wheat on his neck. Peering closer, Alphine gasps Finn's name in utter shock, unable to believe her eyes as she discovers the tattoo on the corpse's neck. In complete denial, Alphine desperately begs for it to be a lie, devastated that she still hasn't had the chance to apologize to him. Still grieving that she hasn't apologized, Alphine desperately clutches the coffin and begs Finn to wake up. Alphine tearfully begs him to wake up, pleading for him to say good morning, Alphine, just one more time. Screaming in agony over why Finn had to die in such a miserable way, Alphine completely collapses while the butler catches her and calls her name in silent sorrow. Noelia explains how the abundant water from Mount Yaofer turns Yasuba's hunting ground into treeless wetlands, while Flick comments on the stunning location of the workshop as they walk. Flick points up in surprise at a massive winged dragon flying overhead, noticing that it is carrying something in its claws. Noelia explains that the hunting ground gets its name because winged dragons from the demonic forest fly there to hunt prey around waterholes, prompting Flick to understand. Arriving at their destination, Flick announces they are here, commenting on how normal the workshop looks despite the dangerous winged dragons flying around. Noelia hesitatingly warns Flick that her teacher, Master Gawain, is a little different from ordinary people. Noelia nervously reassures Flick that her teacher is probably harmless, but Flick skeptically points out her shifty eyes, which she claims is just his imagination. Noelia asks Flick to wait while she prepares to open the door, leaving him puzzled by what kind of preparation is needed. Chanting her spell, Noelia commands the invisible air to form a sturdy wind barrier around her. Flick panics at her extreme precautions, anxiously wondering if there are traps or if Gawain is the type to shoot arrows out of nowhere. Noelia calmly reassures Flick that the wind barrier is merely a basic precaution and that he shouldn't worry about it. Noelia knocks on the door, but Flick remarks that a simple arrow would have been better as a creepy voice calls out Noelia's name from inside. A giant, shadowy figure suddenly rushes out at incredible speed, leaving Flick shocked by the sheer quickness. The shadowy figure crashes headfirst into Noelia's wind barrier with a loud ringing scream. Gawain is stopped by the barrier, crying out in dismay that he cannot have skinship with Noelia, who politely asks him to refrain from it now that she's an adult. Gawain complains about her indifference after their long separation, arguing a hug costs nothing, but Noelia retorts that she would lose her mental well-being. Flick politely steps forward and asks the muscular blacksmith if he is indeed Master Gawain. Galen proudly confirms his identity as the blacksmith, while curiously sizing up the young visitor. Observing Gawain's overly dramatic behavior, Flick dryly notes to himself that the blacksmith is indeed a complete weirdo. Gawain closely inspects Flick, identifying him by his red hair and red eyes, and notes he was curious about him since his fellow swordsman Lloyd took a liking to him. Flick requests Gawain to forge a sword for him, asking if he would accept the request. Gawain proposes that if Flick undoes Noelia's wind barrier and convinces her to allow some skinship, he will forge the sword for free, leaving Flick dumbfounded. Gawain adds that he will completely reject the job if Flick cannot convince Noelia, calling it a highly favorable condition. Looking at Gawain's incredible work, Flick acknowledges his legendary forging skills but remains conflicted about the bizarre conditions. Unwilling to compromise Noelia, Flick simply closes his eyes and tells her that they are going back. Noelia asks if they are really leaving, pointing out she could just endure the hug so Flick can get his sword for free. Flick warmly explains that he has no desire to see Noelia go through something unpleasant just to obtain a good sword, promising to find another blacksmith. Gawain boasts that his swords are the best in the kingdom, but Flick replies that failing his father's request is his own responsibility and he will simply apologize for it. Flick firmly tells Gawain to forget the request, declaring that he has absolutely no intention of sacrificing others for his own benefit. Noelia is deeply touched as Flick prepares to head back, following him with a warm smile. Gawain bursts into boisterous laughter at Flick's stubborn refusal, prompting Noelia and Flick to call him a weird man as well. Gawain calls Flick an absolute fool for rejecting his sword, noting that swordsmen everywhere would sacrifice everything for one of his weapons. Smiling warmly, Gawain declares that he loves honest fools and lunges forward to share skinship with Flick instead. Realizing Gawain's target, Noelia panics and screams for Flick to escape immediately. Before Flick can react, Gawain grabs him in a crushing bear hug of unbelievable strength, leaving Flick gasping. Gawain holds Flick tightly, rubbing against him and telling him to stay still so they can enjoy their skinship. Flick struggles to break free but realizes he cannot budge against Gawain's immense muscles, prompting an angry Noelia to warn her teacher that he is going too far. To stop the chaos, Noelia casts a sleep cloud spell, knocking both Gawain and Flick fast asleep as they tumble to the ground. Flick slowly wakes up in a bed, greeted by Noelia's warm and relieved smile asking if he has finally come to. Sitting up in bed, Flick wonders where he is as Gawain repeatedly bangs on the door, shouting apologies. Noelia firmly tells Gawain to reflect outside for a while, declaring that his prank on Flick went entirely too far. Noelia apologizes for failing to warn him, but Flick reassures her that he is perfectly fine. Flick asks about Gawain's identity, prompting Noelia to explain that he possesses incredible physical abilities. Noelia explains that Gawain has fully mastered physical enhancement magic, confirming Flick's curious inquiry. Noelia demonstrates how physical enhancement magic works, explaining that it directly strengthens the caster's own body. Gawain utilized physical enhancement magic to strengthen his smithing muscles to an inhuman level. Noelia admits Gawain's extreme magic is seen as weird, which Flick quietly notes as she catches herself. An annoyed Noelia overhears Gawain shouting from outside, accusing them of mocking his magical style. Flick reflects on how magicians typically avoid close combat, while Noelia yells for Gawain to be quiet. Noelia explains she uses her wind barrier as a safety measure against Gawain's overpowering magical charges. Noelia apologizes for her ambiguous warnings, but Flick kindly reassures her that no harm was done. Flick jokes about using wind barriers himself, while Noelia notes Gawain has taken a liking to him. Noelia believes Gawain will happily forge the sword, but Flick hesitatingly interrupts her with a new request. Flick earnestly asks Noelia if she would be willing to teach her physical enhancement magic. Flick explains how enhancement magic could bolster his swordsmanship, leaving a flustered Noelia struggling to respond. Gawain suddenly slams his face against the window, loudly calling out Flick's name in excitement. Gawain boasts from the window that he can teach Flick physical enhancement magic in just 1 week. Flick asks if he should accept, and Noelia reluctantly admits Gawain is indeed the best teacher. Determined to protect Flick, Noelia declares she will stay and act as an observer during his training. Noelia insists Flick's safety is vital to the world, while Flick sheepishly dismisses her dramatic concern. Flick panics at the sight of a winged dragon, urging Noelia to hide while she tries to explain. Flick is completely bewildered to see Gawain casually riding on top of the wild winged dragon. Gawain shouts that he is flying to Lloyd's house to ask for his daughter's company. Gawain demands dinner be ready upon his return as he flies off into the distance. Flick stands stunned by Gawain's dragon riding, while Noelia wallows in embarrassment over her teacher's words. Narrative boxes explain that Gawain flew directly to the Margrave's residence to secure permission for Noelia's stay. Gawain returns by twilight covered in arrows, jovially waving while Flick watches in absolute disbelief. The next day, a fully healed Gawain announces they receive permission and will begin training immediately. Flick and Noelia politely bow, requesting Gawain's guidance as they begin their training session. Noelia claims she is attending to refresh her memory, though Flick notes she already received training. Gawain dramatically rips off his shirt, eagerly declaring that their training session has officially begun. Gawain introduces the first lesson of physical enhancement magic, focusing on raw strength. Gawain explains that strength training involves focusing on specific muscles and using magic to stimulate them. Gawain proudly boasts about muscle bolstering, while Flick questions the necessity of his shirtless flexing. Gawain demonstrates the concept of quickness, explaining it temporarily boosts muscle movement speed. Flick is horrified to see Gawain move so fast that he creates multiple afterimages of himself. Noelia admits Gawain's magic is unfathomable, questioning why any magician would need such extreme speed. Gawain and Noelia bicker over magical defense strategy while Flick asks Gawain to stop cloning. Gawain lunges forward for a hug but is instantly shut down with a blunt crash against Noelia's wind barrier. Noelia coldly demonstrates how barriers are much more effective than dodging with speed. Gawain laments Noelia's loss of childhood affection, but she flatly denies being in a rebellious phase. Noelia formally declares that since she is an adult, she is graduating from further physical affection. Gawain is utterly devastated by Noelia's declaration of graduating from physical affection. Noelia leaves Gawain sobbing while Flick silently agrees that her defensive measures are necessary for survival. A quiet moment of dejection passes as Gawain remains kneeling under Flick's watchful gaze. Gawain turns his attention to Flick, demanding physical affection with a terrifyingly intense expression. To protect Flick, Noelia unleashes a powerful magical strike that sends her teacher crashing down with a painful yell. A furious Noelia warns Gawain to behave while he groans from her painful magical strike. Noelia collapses from magic rebound, prompting Flick to catch her as Gawain comments on her constitution. Gawain reassures Flick that Noelia just needs rest, postponing the training until tomorrow. The next day, Gawain explains muscle structure to Flick to begin their practical training session. Gawain instructs Flick to visualize his own arm muscles changing as he prepares to attempt the magic. Gawain warns that sudden muscle expansion drains nutrients and causes collapse, teasingly citing Noelia's past exhaustion, which embarrasses her. Flick carefully channels his overflowing mana to enhance his physical form, chanting the activation word for physical strength. Flick successfully activates the enhancement on his arm, prompting an impressed reaction from Gawain on his first try. Delighted by Flick's natural talent, Gawain pulls him into another crushing bear hug of physical affection as Flick groans. Sitting on the grass, Noelia reflects on the difficulty of physical enhancement magic, which requires rigorous body conditioning. Noelia turns a serious, questioning gaze toward Flick as she contemplates his unusual capabilities. Gawain explains that his physical contact yesterday revealed how remarkably well-trained Flick's body already is. Gawain tells Flick that mastering physical enhancement magic will elevate him from a top swordsman to the absolute best. Flick contemplates the idea of becoming one of the best swordsmen as he visualizes a powerful warrior. Flick humbly admits his uncertainty but expresses hope, prompting Gawain to resolve to forge an exceptionally special sword. Gawain introduces the next concept of quickness, warning that it consumes 3 times more stamina than basic strength magic. Flick listens closely as Gawain warns that failing to replenish nutrients during this training leads to severe physical collapse. After explaining how quickness targets thighs and arms, Gawain greedily eats, helping Flick understand the blacksmith's massive appetite. Concentrating on his muscles, Flick chants the spell for quickness, successfully activating the magic without any issue. Flick dashes forward at immense speed, successfully replicating the rapid movement he witnessed the previous day. Flick slides to a sudden stop on the grass as Noelia watches his high-speed training run. Gawain boasts that Flick has inherited his magic, while Noelia marvels at Flick's ability to learn after seeing it once. The training session halts briefly as Flick and Gawain stand opposite each other on the open field. As Flick prepares to move, Gawain instantly closes the distance with his own superior speed, startling the young swordsman. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound echoes as both men's stomachs growl simultaneously from their intense training exertion. The exhausting training session finally pauses as they decide to head inside and have lunch. Resting on her bed, Noelia writes in her secret observation diary, documenting Flick's frighteningly fast progress with magic. She writes about Flick mastering strength and quickness within 2 days, recalling how he successfully cast spells on his first try. Noelia notes in her diary that Flick's tactical comprehension of magical effectiveness is just as impressive as his raw casting talent. Noelia rests her blushing face against her arm, overwhelmed by her growing feelings for the young swordsman. She logs how easily Flick handles physical enhancement magic, brushing off the severe strain that normally plagues other casters. Noelia admits in her diary that she feels a touch of jealousy toward Flick's perfect blend of swordsmanship and magic. Noelia humorously dreads the thought of Flick overusing the magic and becoming a bulky, muscle-bound giant like Gawain. Noelia writes down her preference, noting that a lean and compact build is far more suited to Flick. Blushing furiously while hugging her pillow, Noelia writes that she might actually allow Flick to hug her without using her barrier. Tossing and turning, Noelia struggles with her unprecedented feelings, realizing her motives for teaching Flick have become deeply personal. She writes about her desire to support Flick quietly, feeling guilty over her past cold behavior toward him. Suddenly, Flick calls out to Noelia and enters her room, startling the young woman as she hurriedly tries to hide her diary. Noelia panics loudly as Flick enters, while he looks around to find the bag he left behind. Terrified that Flick will discover her secret observation diary tucked under her pillow, Noelia desperately forbids him from looking. Flick sheepishly decides to leave, realizing it is improper to be in her room at night, but Noelia insists on finding his bag herself. Flick expresses his gratitude and apologizes for the intrusion once he is handed his bag. Flustered by the awkward encounter, Flick bids her goodnight as Noelia hastily slams her bedroom door shut. Noelia gasps as she realizes her nightgown was slightly disheveled, panicking over whether she gave Flick an indecent impression. Huddled on the floor in deep embarrassment, Noelia despairs that Flick will now view her as an indecent and strange girl. Noelia buries her face in her bed, utterly devastated by the thought that Flick might avoid her gaze tomorrow. Clinging to her sheets, Noelia tearfully whimpers Flick's name as she wallows in her nighttime embarrassment. Under the bright glow of the night moon, Noelia finds herself completely unable to fall asleep. The next morning, Flick screams in terror as magical beams shoot up at them from the demonic forest below. As they fly, Flick frantically asks about the attack, and Gawain explains it came from a Grand Fortress turtle. Gawain warns that a direct hit from the turtle's projectiles will tear their dragon's wing webbing, causing a fatal fall. Flick gazes down at the smoking landscape below, incredulous that such a dangerous monster is considered a soft-shelled turtle. Flick notes that he easily hunted these slow monsters on the ground before, unaware of how dangerous they are to flyers. Gawain sweatingly admits he has been shot down by them multiple times, leaving Flick highly amused by his teacher's misfortune. Gawain instructs Flick to brace themselves as their winged dragon swoops down to the treetops, where they locate the gathering fortress turtles amidst Flick's frantic panic. Gawain enthusiastically maneuvers through the chaotic onslaught of magical beams, while Flick realizes in horror that he must also perform the same extreme aerial evasions. Struggling to hang on as his dragon maneuvers through the rapid bombardment, Flick frantically concludes that dodging is impossible and prepares to use magic. Realizing he cannot avoid the projectiles, Flick focuses his mana to cast a protective magic barrier around himself. Flick successfully activates his defensive barrier just in time to shield himself from a direct blast. Back at the house, a deeply sleep-deprived Noelia listlessly eats her breakfast with dark circles under her eyes. Entering the dining room, Flick and Gawain are utterly shocked by Noelia's exhausted appearance and immediately question her health. Blushing intensely, Noelia covers her face in deep embarrassment, claiming she only stayed up late writing a letter to a magic research facility. Gently patting Noelia on the head, Flick advises her to rest properly while secretly noting how overly absorbed she becomes in her research. Keeping her face hidden in her hands, Noelia listens as Flick gently cautions her against pushing herself too hard, even for kingdom research. Flick watches Noelia tremble with overwhelming embarrassment, mistakenly worrying that his gentle advice might have been too harsh on her. Noelia gratefully accepts Flick's advice and decides to head back to rest, leaving breakfast ready for the two men. Delighted by her decision, Gawain enthusiastically offers to carry Noelia to her room, much to Flick's concern. Noelia firmly rejects Gawain's offer with a strained smile and promptly shuts the door behind her, leaving Gawain rejected. A close-up of a hearty breakfast spread laid out on the wooden dining table. While eating breakfast, Gawain dejectedly asks Flick if Noelia has been acting too cold towards him compared to her childhood years. Flick points out that Noelia is now a grown woman and likely gets embarrassed by being treated like a child. Accepting Flick's reasoning, Gawain reluctantly concedes that Noelia's distant behavior is simply a natural part of growing up. Watching his teacher's quiet reaction, Flick wonders if Gawain is simply feeling lonely now that his student has grown up. Shifting focus, Gawain instructs Flick to eat quickly so they can head to the demonic forest to practice physical enhancement magic and hunt materials. Flick worries about entering the demonic forest as a mere bronze-rank adventurer, but Gawain dismisses his concerns by citing his exceptional magical talent. As Flick prepares his gear and asks if they will be walking, Gawain simply tells him to stop worrying and finish getting ready. Gawain gives a knowing grin and gestures toward the window, revealing that they will be flying on a winged dragon instead. Standing outside near the stable, Gawain recalls his recent flight to Yuguhanat and claims he wants to take things easy in his older age. Flick is utterly horrified when Gawain suddenly announces that he expects Flick to capture his own winged dragon for transport. Gawain presents a visual guide explaining how to first provoke a dragon with a rock and then snare its mouth with a straw rope. The guide illustrates how to mount the bucking dragon's back and hold on tightly until the wild beast finally surrenders. The lesson concludes with the successful capture of the dragon once it finally emits a high-pitched shriek of submission. Gawain cheerfully claims the process is simple, but an incredibly skeptical Flick loudly demands to know which part of catching a dragon is easy. Handing Flick a straw rope, Gawain instructs him to begin his attempt while warning him not to land in towns to avoid being shot at. Flick suddenly understands the hilarious reason behind Gawain's previous arrow-riddled return, realizing his teacher failed to heed his own advice. Watching the dragons in the sky, Flick acknowledges the immense time-saving benefits of flying but remains anxious about his impending trial. Flick focuses his mana, questioning whether his newly acquired physical enhancement magic will be enough to replicate Gawain's wild dragon-taming feat. Before Flick can overthink any further, Gawain suddenly grabs him by the collar, interrupting his train of thought. Without warning, Gawain hurls Flick directly into the sky toward an enormous wild-winged dragon circling overhead. Flick screams in betrayal as he flies through the air while Gawain mockingly praises him for targeting a massive beast even he had given up on. Pushing his fear aside, Flick focuses on the task and throws his rope directly toward the diving dragon's mouth. Although his rope successfully loops around the dragon's mouth, the powerful beast begins bucking wildly in midair, trying to shake Flick off. Gawain casually yells up advice about holding on to avoid a painful fall, prompting an angry mental retort from Flick. Desperate to gain control over the thrashing monster, Flick prepares to cast a low-voltage electrical spell to stun the dragon. Flick casts a targeted electric shock magic, successfully jolting the wild dragon to subdue its violent thrashing. Subdued by the electric shock, the massive winged dragon emits a final shriek of surrender and stabilizes its flight. Watching from below, Gawain proudly salutes as Flick confirms he has successfully tamed the enormous winged beast. As the tamed dragon peacefully drinks from a trough, Gawain explains that dragons remain loyal to whoever successfully tames them. Flick affectionately feeds his new dragon companion, finding it surprisingly clever and endearing as the beast coos happily. Gawain's casual remark about how delicious dragons are to eat sends a wave of terror through both Flick and his new companion. While Gawain boasts about the dragon's convenience as both transportation and emergency food, Flick gently promises his terrified beast that he won't eat it. Deciding to fully welcome his new partner, Flick gazes warmly at the dragon and decides to give it a name. Their peaceful moment is shattered as a sudden massive barrage of magical beams erupts from the forest below, catching them completely off guard. Reacting quickly, Flick's newly named dragon maneuvers defensively to escape the relentless bombardment from the hidden forest threats. Flick's hands grip the rope tightly as he pulls to guide his dragon. Sweating from the intense maneuver, Flick breathes a sigh of relief after surviving the aerial barrage. Gawain cheerfully proclaims the chaotic escape was fun while Flick looks on completely exhausted. Flick humbly laments his lack of control, but Gawain praises his impressive performance, earning a warm thanks from the boy. Gawain laughs boisterously, admitting a high-altitude barrier would have been safer but far too boring. Flick stares in absolute disbelief at his teacher's reckless logic, rendering them both briefly speechless. Flick asks if the dangerous route was even necessary, prompting a sweating Gawain to claim it was essential dodging practice. Flick silently judges his teacher's reckless antics while Gawain innocently questions the boy's cold gaze. Flick realizes why the workshop is isolated, which Gawain hilariously misinterprets as deep admiration. Flick secretly realizes the remote workshop was actually built to keep the troublesome Gawain far away from Lloyd. Flick wonders if his dragon is worried about him, but Gawain interrupts to announce their landing for material gathering. Flick affectionately thanks and names his dragon companion Dimly, fully trusting him for their future journeys. A quest notification appears as Flick notes the thick fog settling over the demonic forest. Gawain explains that magic-absorbing grass can be refined into magic stones to reduce mana consumption. Flick quickly finds the magic-absorbing grass nearby, holding it up with a proud smile. A new quest requires Flick to harvest blood-sucking mushrooms directly from the heads of madness boars. Gawain casually suggests eating a boar for lunch, prompting Flick to prepare for the hunt. Flick accidentally steps on a branch, instantly drawing the hostile glares of the surrounding boars. With swift and decisive attacks, Flick successfully defeats the boars, leaving them lying motionless. Gawain praises Flick's clean strikes and instructs him to roast the massive beast whole. Flick proudly roasts the meat to perfection, though Gawain greedily claims 3 full portions for himself. Gawain enthusiastically devours his massive portions of roasted meat with an insatiable appetite. Chewing his food, Flick asks about their next objective while noting his teacher's massive appetite. Gawain consults his guidebook, warning that their next gathering target will be tricky. Gawain points to nearby ancient ruins, explaining they must capture a highly agile target alive. Crossing his massive arms, Gawain asks Flick if he has any prior experience exploring ruins. Flick admits he has never entered ruins, only recalling stories shared by an excavator acquaintance. Flick remembers his former party leader Alphine always refusing ruin quests due to her dislike of dark, narrow spaces. Gawain lets out a silent, knowing sigh upon hearing about Flick's restrictive past companion. Gawain snaps Flick out of his sad memories, urging him to finish eating so they can move on. Flick corners a metallic slime inside a cave, casting a stone wall spell to block its escape. Flick grins triumphantly at his trapped prey while Gawain casually observes his success from above. The captured slime suddenly lunges forward and bites Flick's finger, making him scream in pain. Flick panics over the bite, but Gawain calmly explains the creature is harmless, prompting an angry retort. Gawain playfully laughs off his forgetfulness, leaving a highly irritated Flick to nurse his bitten finger. Gawain urges Flick to hurry up, explaining they need 2 slimes to craft the sword. Gawain gazes down with intense dramatic seriousness, claiming he truly wishes he could assist. Gawain explains his powerful aura would scare the slimes away, prompting Flick to tell him to stay put. Flick successfully captures the required metallic slimes, sealing them in a bag to complete his quest. Gawain proudly inspects the captured slimes, announcing they can finally begin forging the sword tomorrow. Gawain eagerly promises to forge an extraordinary weapon, leaving a highly skeptical Flick pleading for a simple, normal sword. While tending to his dragon back at the estate, Flick is suddenly called by a familiar voice. Noelia confirms she is feeling better before staring in utter disbelief at Flick's massive new winged dragon. Flick introduces his loyal dragon Dimly, earning gentle pets from Noelia as she marvels at Flick's impressive taming skills. Noelia questions his plans for the dragon, prompting Flick to desperately plead to keep and raise the beast. Noelia pragmatically warns that bringing a wild dragon near town will result in it being immediately shot down. Noelia proposes using a cloth with her family crest around the dragon's neck to ensure safe passage. Flick considers the crest plan as Noelia generously offers to stable the dragon at her family's private farm. Flick asks if this means the dragon now belongs to her family, causing Noelia to blush and panic furiously. Noelia rapidly and flusteredly defends herself, vehemently denying any hidden or romantic implications behind her helpful suggestions. Noelia eagerly offers her assistance to secure the Margrave's permission, while Flick gratefully accepts her helpful support. Flick warmly urges his dragon Daimel to thank Noelia, prompting the beast to playfully lick her face. A sudden gasp escapes Noelia as Demole grabs her and takes off, while Flick desperately pulls the rope. Swooping through the clouds, Flick securely holds on to Noelia on the back of his flying dragon. Blushing intensely, Noelia is overwhelmed by Flick's close proximity while he sheepishly smiles about the dragon's antics. Looking down at the landscape, Flick asks if she is afraid of heights, which Noelia frantically denies. With cheeks flushed red, Noelia desperately insists she is perfectly fine to hide her growing embarrassment. The white dragon glides smoothly through the sky as Flick accepts her answer with relief. Noelia marvels at the beautiful scenery below, while Flick credits the flight to Daimel's gratitude. Touching her forehead, Flick worries she still has a fever, making the flustered girl blush even harder. Ignoring her embarrassed protests, Flick gently scoops Noelia up in his arms to carry her to bed. The scene shifts to the Grand Alphine estate located within the Hartford Kingdom. Lying in her bed, the black-haired Alphine cries softly as she whispers her lost companion's name. Tears stream down her face as Alphine laments that she never got to apologize to him. Clutching her head in despair, Alphine tearfully regrets failing to notice anything about her companion's feelings. Gray-haired butler Vigo enters the dark bedroom, but Alphine demands to be left entirely alone. Vigo hesitatingly informs her that Jair, the captain of the Royal Knights, has arrived to see her. Jair enters the room and comments on her energy while Alphine complains about his uninvited intrusion. Jair explains that everyone was worried she had caught an epidemic after resting for 2 weeks. Smiling warmly, the silver-haired captain confesses his own concern before changing the subject. Jair kneels by her bedside and asks Alphine if she managed to meet her companion there. A startled Alphine demands to know what he means, quickly realizing her butler leaked the truth. Vigo begs for forgiveness for sharing her secret out of worry while Alphine tries to cover up. Jair sits on her bed defending the butler's actions while Alphine furiously reprimands Vigo for his betrayal. Jair leans in close to her ear, whispering about the various secrets he has uncovered. Pushing her hand away, Jair boasts about knowing all her habits, causing Alphine to react in shock. Jair mockingly expresses sympathy before delivering the shocking claim that her beloved companion died of an illness. Pinned to the bed, Alphine fiercely denies his claim and insists her companion is still alive. Jair holds up an adventurer insignia, asserting it was taken from a black-haired corpse with her companion's tattoo. Devastated by the news of his death, Alphine sheds bitter tears as she gasps in agony. I understand you're going through a really tough time, but please know there's help available. If you're feeling like harming yourself, could you reach out to someone? You can call 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, available 24/7. There is hope and people who want to support you. Will you try that? Alphine grabs the knife and smiles weakly, catching a startled JR completely off guard. Determined to reunite with her companion, Alphine holds the sharp blade directly to her own neck. Jair panics and commands his armored guard to intervene with a sharp clang sounding as the blade clatters to the floor. Her eyes drift closed as she quietly slips into unconsciousness on the mend. Waking up in an unfamiliar room, Alphine weakly questions her whereabouts while Jair inquires about her health. Looking around, Alphine asks where she is, noticing Jair sitting nearby with her butler and maids. Jair smugly welcomes her to his mansion, offering to let her use it as she pleases. Alphine stares back at him in silent, tense suspicion. Footsteps echo as Jair explains he cannot let her try to end her life again since he saved her. Jair gently lifts Alphine's chin, prompting a startled and sweating reaction from the black-haired woman. Jair tells her not to be scared, claiming he has no intention of forcing himself on her. Jair deviously explains he prefers his partners to do what he wants while fully conscious and willing. Alphine demands to know what he wants, while Jair smiles knowingly at her. Rejecting his touch, she pulls her face away with a sudden sharp slap echoing as she swats his hand. Clutching the bedsheets, Alphine calls herself foolish, prompting Jair to look on with amusement. Blushing with anger, Alphine insists she won't understand his intentions unless he speaks to her clearly. Jair smiles patiently and tells her to take all the time she needs to figure it out. Jair exits the room, telling Alphine she is welcome to stay in his mansion as long as she likes. Looking back with a parting smirk, Jair claims his hospitality is his way of showing respect for her deceased companion. Standing by the window, the black-haired Alphine remembers the knight who knocked her out with a single blow, realizing she has never met anyone so strong in the capital. Lying in her bed, Alphine weeps bitterly as she realizes Jair will not let her leave until she submits, even though she only wishes to find Finn and apologize. Meanwhile, Flick suddenly senses something through his enhanced hearing, catching a faint, distant voice crying out that she wants to be with him. Startled by a sudden shout, Flick lets out a panicked cry as Noelle asks if something is wrong. Dizzied by the sudden disruption, Flick reels while Noelia frantically apologizes for disturbing him while his hearing enhancement spell was active. Massaging his ear, Flick admits he must be more careful, while Noelia explains that while he has mastered multiple sensory enhancements, he still needs far more practice for them to be truly useful. Noelia clapping her hands together, reminding Flick that she came to call him for lunch, leaving him to reflect on how much practice he still needs. Looking up at the clear sky, Flick gladly welcomes the lunch call as they head back inside. The scene shifts back to the Hartford Kingdom mansion, where a maid knocks on Alphine's chamber door to deliver her lunch. Opening the double doors, the maid gasps in shock as she finds the elegant room completely empty. Sitting in a lavish room, the silver-haired Jair asks his butler Vigo about Alphine's condition after 3 days of confinement. Vigo reports that while she eats her meals and her health is fine, Alphine remains completely lifeless and lost in thought. Raising his wine glass, Jair smirks and commends Vigo for his brilliant plan working perfectly. Holding his glass up to the light, Jair smugly declares that Alphine is now nothing but a helpless, broken woman. Vigo advises caution, warning Jair not to let his guard down since Alphine has always been a simple woman devoted entirely to her sword. Swirling his wine, Jair calmly acknowledges the advice, noting there is still a chance Alphine might try to end her life again. Panel shows a maid searching the hallway while Jair explains that is why he keeps her closely monitored by maids and knights at all times. Jair confidently asserts that with just one more step, the Sword Maiden will be completely obedient and fall into his hands. Standing silently on the other side of the heavy door, Alphine overhears Jair's voice and gasps in shock upon hearing Finn's name. Listening closely, Alphine hears Vigo explain how Finn's disappearance proved highly convenient for their schemes. Vigo details his plot of using a lookalike corpse, dyeing its hair black, adding a matching neck tattoo, and bribing guild officials to make Alphine believe Finn was dead. Jair bursts into loud, triumphant laughter, praising Vigo's brilliant scheme while the butler urges him to keep his voice down. Jair smiles smugly, while Vigo respectfully requests that he refrain from making such risky demands in the future. Vigo mentions their duty to assist Jair's father, the Prime Minister, while Jair privately resolved to discard Vigo once he possesses the kingdom's most beautiful woman. Trembling with intense fury, Alphine squeezes her fist so hard that blood drips from her hand, realizing the corpse she saw was a complete lie. Tears stream down Alphine's face as she curses her own stupidity for being so easily fooled by a fake corpse. Crying tears of profound relief, Alphine smiles as she realizes she was a fool to believe her beloved companion was dead. Composing herself, Alphine stands tall in her room, deciding to stay calm, assess the situation, and act strategically rather than impulsively. Staring resolutely, Alphine feels incredibly glad that Finn is still alive and mocks Jair's ridiculous attempt to make her his own. Staring at Vigo's back through her thoughts, Alphine realizes the butler is Jair's agent and must possess crucial information regarding Finn's true whereabouts. With a sudden explosive kick, Alphine slams the door wide open to confront the conspirators. Storming into the room, Alphine furiously demands that they explain the conversation she just overheard. Jair jumps up from his seat in absolute terror, sweating and shouting in disbelief at Alphine's sudden intrusion. With blinding speed, Alphine lunges forward and presses a sharp sword directly against Jair's throat, demanding that he and Vigo tell her everything about Finn. Stepping back in alarm, Vigo calls out to her while Jair frantically asks Alphine if she has completely lost her mind. Pressed against the blade, Jair sweatily warns that she will lose her Sword Saint title and nobility if the king finds out, but Alphine coldly rejects those titles, demanding Finn's location. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Vigo raises his hands in surrender, begging her to lower the sword and promising to tell her everything. Pressing the blade slightly deeper, Alphine draws a thin line of blood from Jair's neck, warning that his master will die if they do not start talking immediately. Tears of absolute terror stream down Jair's face as he desperately begs Vigo to save him, crying out that he does not want to die. Vigo begins to explain, confirming his belief that Finn is indeed still alive. Vigo reveals that the man carrying Finn's adventurer badge had actually found it in the frontier city of Yugennote. The scene briefly cuts to a snow-capped mountain fortress, representing Vigo's explanation of the traveler's journey to Algren to assume another identity. Looking around the room, Alphine listens as Vigo admits they lost all trace of Finn in Yugennote, confirming he had headed to the frontier. Glaring intensely, Alphine demands to know if they are hiding any other details from her. Vigo looks back with a solemn expression, insisting they truly do not know where Finn is. Alphine stares in cold silence, deducing that Vigo has revealed all the information he possesses. Jair tearfully asks if she is satisfied now and begs her to release him, but Alphine flatly refuses. Vigo stands in silence as Alphine commands him to prepare a carriage, declaring Jair will be her hostage until she safely exits the capital. Spreading his arms with a dark smile, Vigo apologizes but calmly refuses to comply with her demands. Alphine gasps in shock as the glass windows behind her suddenly shatter, revealing the massive dark silhouettes of armored knights ready to strike. An armored knight violently crashes through the window, scattering shards of glass everywhere. Vigo orders Alphine's death to protect Jair as she swiftly dodges the knight's lethal strike. Screaming a battle cry, Alphine counterattacks from the air and successfully lands a direct blow on the armored knight. Alphine is horrified to find that her sword strike barely pierced the knight's unnaturally hard stone-like armor. Realizing she cannot defeat an opponent with green blood and sword-proof skin, Alphine focuses on escaping to find Finn. Spotting a carriage passing below, Alphine prepares to leap down toward the unsuspecting driver. Alphine lands in the wagon and immediately covers the shock driver's mouth to silence her. Alphine demands silence, apologizing as she urgently declares that she is hijacking the wagon. The wagon driver, a 28-year-old excavator named Mela, introduces herself and recounts how the legendary Sword Saint literally dropped into her life. Mela frets dramatically over the chaotic start of her journey in her hijacked wagon. Alphine stares back in tense silence while Mela gazes at her with starry-eyed admiration. Alphine warns Mela not to make a scene before releasing her hand, leaving Mela to gasp for air. Alphine shushes Mela as guards search outside, while Mela eagerly whispers in excitement about meeting the famous Sword Saint. Refusing to share details, Alphine confirms her identity and reiterates her urgent need to borrow the wagon. Alphine internally sympathizes with Mela's confusion, admitting that falling from the sky and demanding a wagon is bizarre. Outside, a guard suddenly spots the wagon on the side of the road and alerts his companion. The guard approaches the wagon, asking if anyone is inside and stating they are searching for a black-haired woman. The guard questions Mela's presence, explaining that a sick woman has recently escaped from a nearby mansion. Mela falsely claims she stopped to change her sweaty clothes, while the guard warns that the escapee's life is in danger. Ignoring her privacy, the suspicious guard rudely shoves the wagon curtain aside to inspect the interior. The guards peer inside and are instantly frozen in shocked embarrassment by what they see. Mela exposes her bare back to the guards, mockingly pointing out her orange hair to prove she is not their target. Mela coldly asks if peeping is their official duty, prompting the embarrassed guards to stammer out an apology. Flustered and defeated, the guards quickly retreat to continue their search elsewhere. Once the guards leave, Mela playfully plants a kiss on Alphine's cheek, catching the flustered sword saint completely off guard. Mela boldly gropes Alphine's chest and licks her cheek, leaving the hero utterly scandalized and blushing furiously. Alphine grudgingly thanks Mela for the help, though Mela now sports a massive, well-deserved bump on her head. Mela formally introduces herself as a ruins explorer and asks for her companion's name as they shake hands. Alphine requests Mela's wagon, explaining her urgent need to escape the capital and head to the frontier city of Huguenot. Alphine offers to pay any amount for the wagon, but Mela smugly declines, stating she is not short on cash. Instead of selling her wagon, Mela enthusiastically proposes that they travel together on a romantic getaway. Mela cheerfully plans their journey in disguise, ignoring Alphine's protests as the wagon sets off toward the guild checkpoints. The scene shifts to a peaceful workshop cottage with smoke rising gently from its chimney. Flick coordinates chores with Noelia, sending her to cook while he goes to feed their companions. Sudden loud slap echoes as a hand slams forcefully onto a wooden table. Gawain ecstatically throws his hands in the air, roaring that his task is finally completed. Gawain violently shakes a dizzy Flick, shouting in absolute ecstasy that his work is finally complete. Gawain forcefully shoves the newly forged hilt into Flick's face, proudly declaring it his absolute masterpiece. Flick takes a test swing with the sword, noting with surprise how incredibly lightweight the weapon feels. Flick admires the blade's perfect balance of flexibility and hardness, finding it incredibly easy to handle. Flick enthusiastically praises the craft, prompting Gawain to burst into a booming, proud laugh. The sword suddenly speaks, addressing Flick as master and expressing honor in working with him. Flick reacts in complete confusion to being called master while Noelia stares at the weapon in sheer shock. Sensing trouble, Gawain sweatily looks away and begins whistling to act innocent. Noelia, suspicious of Gawain, demands to know what he did to the weapon during the forging process. Gawain continues to whistle nervously, desperately trying to ignore her questioning. Noelia threatens to report Gawain and have his workshop relocated to the dangerous demonic forest if he keeps playing dumb. Noelia sighs and promises to let the matter slide if he simply tells her the absolute truth about the sword. Terrified of the demonic forest, Gawain immediately caves, tearfully admitting he only wanted to surprise Flick. Gawain finally confesses that Flick's new weapon is an incredibly rare, sentient magical sword possessing its own intelligence. Gawain explains how the metal slime from the ruins reacted with a magic stone to create a speaking sword. Gawain excitedly tells Flick and Noelia that his masterpiece is a cute, talking magic sword. Noelia screams in utter disbelief and shock at the bizarre weapon Gawain has manufactured. Gawain reassures them that the intelligent weapon is completely obedient to its wielder. Gawain nervously reveals that the creation of such an intelligent weapon is actually illegal. Flick reacts with concern about the sword's self-growth ability, while Noelia despairs over Gawain's recklessness. Flick holds the sword and questions if its intelligence is limited to just speaking. Gawain proudly explains that the sword's high intelligence also allows it to wield magic. Flick is shocked to learn about its magic capability, which requires absorbing the wielder's power. Gawain reassures him that the embedded stone reduces magic consumption, making Flick plan to monitor his power. Flick wonders if the sword acts as a magical catalyst similar to Noelia's staff. Flick realizes that the childlike voice he heard earlier belongs to his new magical sword. The magic sword shines its central eye and enthusiastically addresses Flick as its master. Flick stands frozen in bewilderment as everyone around him reacts with complete confusion. Flick asks if the sword can read his mind, and the sword confirms it can hear him. Flick realizes his blood from a slime bite bonded them, while Noelia and Gawain watch in confusion. Flick asks about its magical limits, and the sword reveals it can only cast fire arrows. The magic sword requests a target to demonstrate its magic, prompting a surprised Flick to think. Flick asks Noelia if she has lit the stove yet, realizing he has the perfect target. Flick instructs the magic sword to target the firewood inside the stone stove without destroy it. The magic sword begins chanting a mysterious spell, catching Noelia and Flick completely off guard. The sword fires a magical blast, successfully igniting the firewood inside the stone stove. Flick and Noelia stare in amazement as the stove burns, confirming the sword's magical capability. Gawain boasts about his achievement, while Noelia notes with surprise that the chant was incredibly fast. Gawain dreams of mass-producing the sword to eliminate chance, while the sword reports its success. Noelia grimly points out that Gawain will be imprisoned long before any mass production can occur. Noelia warns that the kingdom would outlaw such a dangerous weapon, sending Gawain into a panic. Gawain despairs over his forbidden masterpiece, while Flick realizes he has acquired an extraordinary weapon. Preparing for a field test, Flick and Noelia arrive at the outskirts of the demonic forest. Noelia encourages Flick, reassuring him that he will utilize the magical sword exceptionally well. While Gawain complains about being left behind, the flying beast Daimol pledges its utmost loyalty. Soaring over the lush landscape, Flick spots something highly unusual on the forest floor below. Flick cries out in shock as a massive violent explosion erupts from the dense trees. Flick and Noelia watch in horror as Gawain is violently thrown into the air. Noelia points toward the forest floor, frantically alerting Flick to a new and deadly threat. A massive, terrifying three-headed beast roars, identified by Noelia as the demon beast Cerberus. Flick asks about its power, and Noelia warns him that fighting it is highly dangerous. Terrified, Noelia explains that the creature has left its usual southern hunting grounds for unknown reasons. Handing Noelia the rope, Flick firmly states his intention to dive down and rescue Gawain. Flick prepares to leap while Noelia worries about the extreme danger of confronting the beast. Flick orders Demoli to carry Noelia to safety, despite her protests and deep concern for him. Flick leaps off the flying beast, diving headfirst toward the forest as Noelia screams his name. Plunging through the sky, Flick begins chanting a wind spell to soften his rapid descent. Activating a wind barrier to land safely, Flick enhances his hearing to search for Gawain. Flick peers through the bushes and finds Gawain, who is startled by his sudden appearance. Gawain frantically tells Flick to run, but Flick insists he came to save him. Gawain suddenly points behind Flick, warning him of an approaching danger as Flick turns around. The three terrifying heads of the Cerberus tower over them, glaring down with lethal intent. The panicked magic sword asks Flick how to proceed against the formidable three-headed demon beast. Flick prepares his weapon, commanding the magic sword to hold the beast back with fire arrows. Flick's magic sword eagerly consents to utilizing unlimited magic power as the giant monster looms. Flick leaps forward and activates his spell, unleashing a targeted magical blast at the opponent. The terrifying beast glares through the smoke, its massive reptilian eye locking onto its target. With a thunderous roar, the three-headed monster unleashes a devastating elemental blast directly at them. Gawain leaps in front of Flick, raising a powerful magic shield to block the oncoming attack. The colossal beast rears its multiple heads back, preparing another relentless assault from above. Gawain struggles to hold the line, warning Flick that the beast's dark breath is corroding his shield. Flick courageously charges forward alone, aiming his magical blade directly at the towering monster. Flick successfully slashes one of the heads, but dark, ominous blood instantly oozes from the wound. Flick is horrified to realize that the beast's severed wound is rapidly healing itself. His magic sword urges him to try again, prompting Flick to prepare another focused magical strike. Flick unleashes a powerful flame blast from his sword, striking the beast directly. The monster screams in agony as the concentrated heat burns through its flesh. Flick notices the wound is searing, giving him hope that they can defeat the creature. Just as Flick is blown backward, Noelia suddenly arrives, unleashing her signature tornado spell to protect him. Noelia tells Flick to focus on the enemy now, promising they can argue about his recklessness later. Flick expresses his gratitude as Gawain runs up, immensely relieved that Noelia has arrived to support them. Now united, Gawain suggests they quickly devise a coordinated battle plan to take down the beast. Noelia explains the monster's weaknesses, noting its magic-resistant fur, high cellular regeneration, and need for continuous attacks. Flick shares his discovery that burning the wounds prevents the beast's rapid self-healing ability. Gawain notes they must immobilize the heads first to prevent another devastating breath attack. The talking sword suggests Flick try creating a flaming blade, leaving the young swordsman momentarily confused. While Noelia doubts an inorganic weapon can hold magic, Gawain proudly reveals he used magic-absorbing components. The multi-headed beast suddenly interrupts their brainstorming with a ferocious synchronized roar. Gawain bravely charges forward to draw its attention, instructing Flick to utilize Daimol for assistance. Flick commands Daimol to flank the creature from the other side. Screaming a battle cry, Gawain lunges directly at the beast's central head. Daimol soars overhead, successfully distracting the monster's attention. With the beast distracted, Flick readies his sword as his sentient weapon eagerly prepares for battle. Flick concentrates his energy, successfully imbuing his sword with a blazing shroud of fire. Noelia steps forward, preparing to support his attack with her own magic. Flick charges forward like a meteor as Noelia unleashes a powerful wind spell to accelerate him. Flick strikes with absolute precision, slicing through the beast's neck and igniting the flesh. His magic sword cheers in pure excitement at the massive display of flames. Exhausted, Flick's vision blurs as the physical toll of the battle catches up to him. Slumped against a tree, Flick groans in pain while a remaining head lunges toward him. Noelia screams Flick's name in pure panic as Gawain warns that the beast is targeting him. Flick struggles to breathe, admitting the previous impact took a heavy toll on his body. Gritting his teeth, Flick resolves to channel all of his remaining strength into one final decisive strike. Gawain screams in panic, warning that using life-threatening body enhancement magic is incredibly reckless. Refusing to back down, Flick charges headfirst toward the lunging beast with a fierce battle cry. Flick targets the base of the beast's neck, coordinating the strike with his eager magic sword. With a final desperate swing, Flick unleashes a massive crescent wave of pure fire. The magic sword screams in ecstasy as it channels its maximum power into the blow. A massive, blinding explosion erupts as the attack completely vaporizes the creature. The colossal beast's physical form begins to disintegrate into dark particles. The severed remaining pieces of the monster collapse limply to the forest floor. Completely exhausted and unable to move from the body enhancement, Flick collapses onto his back. Magic sword happily consumes the beast's core as Noelia runs toward Flick in tears. Noelia weeps in relief over Flick's safety, while Gawain casually suggests they eat the slain beast. Flying high on Dimmaline, Noelia wonders if the slain Cerberus is even safe to eat. The scene shifts to the grand mansion of the premier count as day begins to fade. Back inside, Noelia reflects on how exhausting her adventures yesterday were. Lying on a couch, Noelia notes that her father surprisingly listened to her story. Her father questions her about the intelligent sword Gawain forged for Flick. Flick confirms to the bearded count that they defeated Cerberus using the magical weapon. The count inquiries about the winged dragon in the stables, which Flick admits they captured. The count sighs over their reckless behavior while Flick nervously realizes they are talking about Daimel. Pinching his brow, the count laments that associating with Gawain always leads to trouble. Noelia protests as her father declares that intelligent weapons are strictly forbidden in the kingdom. Noelia defends the sword, pointing out its crucial role in overcoming Cerberus' strong magic resistance. The count explains that an intelligent weapon risks driving its wielder berserk, making it extremely dangerous. While Flick maintains the sword won't go berserk, the count insists the ban exists for good reason. Noelia argues that the sword is highly obedient to Flick and relies entirely on his magic. Noelia emphasizes that only someone with Flick's unique magic can utilize the weapon's true potential. The count examines the sword, questioning the claims about its independent magical casting capabilities. Flick details how the sword ignited Cerberus' flesh upon contact, successfully defeating the beast. A soft clack sounds as the count inspects the sword, processing the reality of its immense power. Letting out a weary yawn, the count admits such power makes the weapon even more hazardous. The magic sword suddenly wakes up and asks where they are, surprising everyone in the room. The count is left speechless as he realizes the sword actually has a voice of its own. The count exasperatedly covers his face, while the sentient sword asks if it is the outrageous creation. When the count asks if the sword can cast magic on its own, it enthusiastically confirms. The sword cheerfully explains that it learns new spells by absorbing delicious monster essences. Flick sweat drops as the sword lists several new elements it acquired from Cerberus' delicious core. The sword vows to keep growing and do its best, leaving the count completely stunned by its politeness. The count remains silent, staring at the remarkably well-spoken weapon in disbelief. Walking to the window, the count concedes and suggests Flick should give the well-spoken sword a name.
As they walk away, Flick wonders what to name the sword while Noelia confirms her father's approval.
Flick proposes the name Deer, which the sword enthusiastically accepts, declaring its new identity. Flick formally names the sword Dare and looks forward to working together as they walk down the hall. Back in her room, Noelia addresses her mother's memory, marveling at her father's unexpected approval of Flick. Noelia reflects on Flick's extraordinary talent, believing he will soon surpass her heroic father. Noelia continues to admire Flick's innate genius, feeling deeply inspired by his feats. Blushing deeply, Noelia hugs Flick's cloak tight as she swoons over his gentle and kind nature. She covers her face, wishing she could find the courage to confess her love to him. Suddenly, her maid opens the door to announce Flick's arrival, catching Noelia completely off guard. Flustered, Noelia hides her face as the maid walks in, explaining she let herself in. Noelia stammers that the maid should have knocked, but the maid points out she knocked 3 times. The maid suggests washing and returning the cloak to Flick, making Noelia blush even harder. Noelia begs the maid to keep her secret, and the maid gladly promises to do so. As she helps Noelia dress, the maid expresses joy that her lady has finally fallen in love. Brandishing a makeup brush, the maid firmly encourages Noelia not to be timid with her feelings. The maid, Suzanne, explains she arranged a celebration dinner to give Noelia a chance to shine. Noelia worries about making Flick uncomfortable, unsure how to be close to him. Clutching Flick's cloak close, Noelia admits she has never felt such strong love before. Suzanne gently applies blush, reassuring Noelia that she has found a truly wonderful love. Suzanne promises to help make her love succeed and gets Noelia ready for the feast. The scene shifts to a grand feast where Gawain and Noelia's father wait happily at the table. Wearing a stunning dress, Noelia beautifully pours wine for Flick, leaving him pleasantly surprised. Lloyd questions Noelia about her overly formal dress, prompting Gawain to speak up. A heavy silence falls as both Lloyd and Gawain choke on their food, with Gawain calling Lloyd tactless. Noelia is startled by a familiar voice praising her progress in magic as someone enters the room. Flick stands up abruptly to introduce himself to Linus, who explains he received Suzanne's letter. Linus praises Flick as a handsome apprentice, making Noelia stammer in deep embarrassment. Linus tells Flick there's no need for formality, welcoming him as a grand disciple. Flick blushes slightly and politely thanks the legendary sage for his kindness. Gawain reacts in surprise to Linus's arrival, while Linus praises Flick for mastering his physical enhancement magic. Gawain expresses relief that Flick inherited the magic that even Noelia could not master. Lloyd remains stubborn about Flick's abilities, while the narrator explains the kingdom's apprenticeship rules. Linus notes Flick is a promising young talent fit to inherit Lloyd's hero title. Lloyd refuses to easily pass on his title, while Noelia begs them to stop talking business. Noelia asks Linus to query Flick about the magic sword, which Linus readily agrees to do. The scene focuses on the plates of food as Linus processes the explanation. Flick explains the sword's offensive magic capabilities while Linus envisions how the elemental strike functions. Linus acknowledges the cleverness of using various magical attributes to exploit an enemy's weakness. A wine glass is gently set down on the table as the discussion wraps up. Linus praises the discovery as revolutionary, which Gawain attributes to combining his physical enhancement components. Lloyd spits his drink in shock at Noelia's request, just as a guard bursts in. Lloyd demands details as the guard announces a sighting of an abyss walker in the forest. The guard explains survivors of a recent monster attack reported the terrifying creature's return. Lloyd immediately orders Mice to gather the soldiers and warn the citizens to remain indoors. Mice checks if the messenger can still run while Linus volunteers to accompany Lloyd. Flick stands silently as Lloyd commands everyone to prepare their armor for departure immediately. A tragic memory of two crying orphan children standing in the rain next to graves. Lloyd apologizes to Flick for cutting the feast short, telling him to get some rest. Flick firmly requests to join the mission, surprising Lloyd with his determined stance. Flick explains he cannot do nothing when the beast that killed his parents has returned. Flick vows to face the Abyss Walker, leaving Lloyd staring in heavy silence. Lloyd closes his eyes and reluctantly agrees to let Flick join them. Flick suggests flying ahead on Dimor to assess the demonic forest first. Lloyd agrees the pterosaur will be useful and tells Mice to explain the location to Flick. Noelia declares she will accompany Flick and calls for Susanna to help her change clothes. Lloyd strictly forbids her from going, but Noelia defiantly lets down her hair for battle. Lloyd groans in frustration as Noelia quietly reminds him of their shared loss. Ace remarks on Noelia's stubbornness as Noelia asserts that she also lost her mother. Lloyd angrily shakes Flick, ordering him to protect Noelia since it is an emergency. Flying under the bright moon, Flick remembers the reports locating the beast near Abyssfall. Noelia explains she knows about Abyss Walkers from her father and can easily identify one. Flick expresses gratitude, admitting he only knows stories, which makes Noelia blush deeply. Blushing deeply, Noelia clings tightly to Flick's back as they fly through the night. Looking down at the forest, Flick suggests they rest until sunrise before starting their search. By noon the next day, Flick walks through the forest, frustrated by the lack of clues. Noelia flies overhead on Dimor, scanning the dense trees to keep watch over Flick. Suddenly hearing a rustle, Noelia alerts Flick just as a sudden sound echoes. A terrifying monster ambushes Flick, forcing him to draw his sword and defend himself. Noelia activates her visual enhancement magic to analyze the attacker from above. She identifies the creature's defining features, including its jet black skin and single red eye. Noelia screams to Flick, confirming that the hostile creature is indeed an Abyss Walker. Shaken by the heavy blow, Flick prepares to counter as Deer eagerly unleashes a lightning spell. Startled by a sudden presence, the single-eyed Abyss Walker stands tall in the forest. Flick lunges forward, shouting determinedly as he stabs his sword deep into the beast. Dare warns Flick that the creature lacks a monster factor, while Flick struggles against its hard skin. Stunned by the thick green liquid dripping from his blade, Flick recoils in shock. Confused by the weird blood, Flick questions if Abyss Walkers are actually monsters at all. Flick leaps back in surprise, realizing all real monsters are supposed to possess a factor. A sudden, violent gust of wind tears through the trees, catching him completely off guard. A powerful blast erupts, scattering debris everywhere in a chaotic, blinding flash. Wounded and coughing up blood, Flick collapses against a tree root, groaning in heavy pain. Noelia calls out from her flying mount, but Flick quickly warns her to stay back. Wiping blood from his mouth, Flick realizes his magic and physical attacks are completely ineffective. Remembering the tragedy from 20 years ago, Flick grips his sword, refusing to back down. Determined to find a way to win, Flick is startled as Noelia quickly rushes to his side. Flick looks around the empty, quiet clearing, realizing the monstrous beast has completely vanished. Noelia chants a spell to cast her healing light magic, easing Flick's severe pain. Noelia explains there might be other hidden wounds, politely asking to inspect his jacket. With a swift motion, Noelia pulls open Flick's shirt, exposing his bruised chest. Examining him closely, Noelia points out another scrape, gently placing her hand over the injury. Moving her hands across his skin, she continues her thorough inspection, noting more wounds. Blushing furiously with swirly eyes, a flustered Noelia stammers as she points out endless potential injuries. Flick sits up and asks if she is all right, noting her bright red face. Flustered, Noelia insists she is perfectly fine and eager to continue helping, leaving Flick speechless. Lloyd and Gawain finally locate the pair, with Gawain apologizing for their late arrival. Well, that is certainly one way to get caught in an extremely compromising position. Safe inside their tents, the party discusses how Flick's sword failed to pierce the skin. Sighing deeply over a map, Lloyd questions the creature's absurd defense and physical resilience. Lloyd adamantly insists magic must work, recalling how the previous Abyss Walker was easily defeated. Noelia counters that normal magic failed, suggesting Flick's elemental magic sword might succeed. Flick adds that he noticed green blood on his blade, surprising the older warriors. Lloyd strokes his beard thoughtfully, suspecting there is a deeper reason behind their failure. A guard's warning of a high-speed ambush is cut short, leaving Flick and Noelia horrified. Amidst raging fires, the terrifying Abyss Walker looms over the camp, cornering the soldiers. Lloyd shouts in alarm as the monstrous creature suddenly aims a massive arm cannon. Flick senses immediate danger as a strange red light glows from the terrifying weapon. Lloyd desperately tackles Flick to the ground as a powerful projectile blasts through the camp. Noelia watches in utter horror as Lloyd shields Flick from the devastating explosion. Panic erupts as the survivors realize the weapon was fired without a single trace of magic. Armored guards bravely charge the monstrous creature, swearing to stop its rampage. The soldier's desperate pleas are violently cut short as the monster mercilessly crushes him. Blood splatters across the dark forest floor as the cruel, grinning beast easily decimates the guards. Realizing the desperate situation, Linus urges Lloyd to order a swift retreat for the soldiers. Raising his hand, Linus unleashes support magic, commanding everyone to get down. Linus chants his spell, unleashing a blinding spark explosion that engulfs the entire battlefield. The dust settles to reveal the menacing silhouette of the Abyss Walker standing completely unscathed. Linus and Lloyd realize in horror that the beast is indeed completely immune to magic. Looking at the unscathed beast, Lloyd sweats in disbelief, questioning if this is the same creature. Determined to turn the tide, Flick draws his weapon, calling upon blazing flames. As Flick ignites his weapon, Lloyd and Linus watch in awe of the magic sword. Seeing the impressive display, Gawain loudly asks if his own sword can also be enhanced. Linus suggests trying to envelope their own weapons in magic, revealing their swords were actually experiments. Gawain successfully channels the blazing flame spell, marveling at the intense magic now coating his weapon. Linus warns that the makeshift enchantment is highly unstable, leaving Gawain's safety entirely unguarded against the lurking monster. Dismissing the warning due to the critical emergency, Gawain defiantly charges forward as the beast leaps to attack. With a fierce strike, Gawain slashes the creature, causing a painful screech to echo through the dark woods. Struggling against the beast's immense physical pressure, Gawain realizes the flame magic is working and shouts for Flick to strike.